Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
To their great regret, they lived at different ends of the village. You might think that in a village there are 2 or 3 streets and you can get to your girlfriend in a few minutes. But their village was very, very big, and in the mornings a bus would go around to pick up the kids and take them to school. Catherine's mother was a teacher, and their house was a stone's throw from the school. So Lucy often stayed overnight at Catherine's house, especially in winter, when the frost was fierce. The girls were unlikely to become friends. Lucy came from a family delicately labeled dysfunctional. Her father left her mother with 4 children, and Lucy was the eldest. Her mother drank, and that's something you can't hide in the village, much less a new friend 10 years younger than you. And the house was a very bad old one, probably from the 50s of the last century. Old, wooden. We could only dream of any amenities. We got water from a column, and in winter we stoked the stove. And the worst thing was that all 6 people lived in one room, the mother and her friend and the children. And when the mother was drunk, which happened almost every day, she didn't care whether there was food in the refrigerator or not. The neighbors called the neighbors, and inspectors started to visit the house, looking at the ragged, unkept children who looked like orphans. In the end, the children were taken to the city and transferred to a rehabilitation center, sort of temporarily, to see if the mother would come to her senses or not. Otherwise, she was threatened with deprivation of parental rights. Only Lucy went to school, and Ekaterina's mother was her class teacher. She was supposed to visit Lucy at the center to see how she was doing. Natalie bought sweets, coloring books, colored pencils, and went. Nothing from this program was missed. Natalie heard that only 200 grams of Karafa candy could be brought in. She was allowed to see Lucy for 20 minutes, and all that time she cried, clinging to the young teacher, who had not been well liked before. She desperately longed for the center and said that she was better off with her mother, even if she was hungry at home, even if her mother drank, but it was still her mother. And here in the center, her mother had never come to see her. Back in the village, Natalie, without going home, went to Walker's house. "Listen, Naomi," she said to the woman who, to put it plainly, was drunk again. "Your fate is being decided now. You're going to lose the most precious thing you have." And she painted in colors that Naomi was about to lose her parental rights, and then her children would be whisked away to foster homes. They're still small, pretty, healthy. I'm told they'll take them in a heartbeat, and you'll be all alone, like a finger. And if you ever want to have another baby, you're already sick yourself. Look at your drunken face. You'll give birth to an invalid or a freak, and you'll suffer with him for the rest of your life, unless you hand him over to the state again. Natalie managed to find words that made Naomi cry. She must have realized how serious the situation was. It was agreed that she would be put in a drug treatment center and then coded. "No one will hire me after this," Naomi cried. They wouldn't hire her for any responsible and bread and butter position, of course. Natalie didn't deceive her, but as a janitor, for example, "Quite well, I'll talk, you just get better." And a few months later, against the neighbors' predictions, everything worked out. Naomi got coded and was hired to clean the area around the village administration. The wages were small, but there were no delays. In addition, there were some kind-hearted women who provided constant help, bringing Naomi's children things that their own children had grown out of, as well as some groceries. They all had their own gardens, kept livestock, and had something to share. Natalie got Lucy free lunches at school. In addition, she began to invite the girl home to study with her in addition to her abilities. And her mother, seeing a D in her daughter's diary, could take up her belt and say, "Do you want to be as poor as me? You're going to take up the bottle like me? It's not going to happen. Go and study, you bastard." Natalie sat Lucy down to do her homework, explained the material if she didn't understand something at school. And just like that, Lucy became friends with her daughter Catherine. Now, when classes were over, Lucy often ignored the school bus and walked with Catherine. Her friend's house seemed to her like a paradise on earth. It was just an ordinary, middle-class country house, but very clean and well-maintained. Natalie had come to the village to work with little Catherine in her arms, and she had never talked about the girl's father, but she seemed to be coping with her new life. The children at school loved her and a little bit afraid of her, as it was impossible to get a good grade from her. And at home she had time to do everything and check notebooks, and knit beautiful napkins and grow roses in the front garden. Lucy never tired of admiring the embroidery, the lace runners, the shiny black piano, the porcelain figurines. Once for her birthday, Natalie gave her a gift of a potted white indoor rose. Lucy carried it home like a jewel. A few days later, her stepfather, who was still drinking, mistook sugar for salt, poured 3 spoonfuls into his tea, and then, out of frustration, splashed the salted boiling water right on the poor flower. Later, Lucy thought that she could forgive her stepfather for many things, but not this rose. He knew that Lucy was afraid to breathe on it, and yet, Catherine and Lucy were very different, but they were still very good together. Catherine loved to read and masterfully retold what she had read, so Lucy only hailed. She was naive and trusting in this respect. She did not realize that the writer had made it all up, and she took his flight of fancy for reality. In turn, she was a master of inventing different games, not always safe, and Catherine, who had not previously had a close friend, all this is terribly fascinating. And if in early childhood girlfriends were limited to the fact that arranged a house under the bed, dragged their pillows, candle and tell each other different scary stories, burned accidentally mattress does not count, then in 8th grade, they almost brought their mothers to a heart attack, going at night in the forest to look for blooming fern. Of course, they did not hope to find the treasure. It was more a test of their own courage to go into the forest at night, whether they were weak or not. Lucy was once again flogged after this adventure, and her girlfriend was locked up at home for a week. It was a great distress to Lucy to learn that Catherine would be leaving for the city after 9th grade to go to medical school. "This is a chance," Ekaterina said, as usual, thinking seriously and sensibly. "There is a huge competition in medical schools, and it is quite possible that I will not pass. It would be easier to get in after college, especially for evening classes." "You'll never come back here," Lucy said bitterly. "You'll meet someone in town, get married, and that's it. You'll visit your mother once in a while and give her grandchildren for the summer. It's good if you come to see me too." "No," Catherine argued. "I am, on the contrary, thinking of going back, only with a diploma. We have a hospital, but there is no one to work. The only doctor comes once a week. You go to him to invite him to the patient, and he jokes, 'Well, if you pour me a drink, then so be it, I'll come in.' That's no big deal, and we have so many old people here. What is it like for them to get to the hospital in the district center in a crowded bus?" But Lucy only waved her hand. Only now she realized that this friendship, like the sun, had lit up her whole life. Without Catherine, everything seemed bleak and hopeless. Lucy had a premonition that everything would go wrong, and so it did. Her mother wouldn't let her go to the city with her friend, and Lucy decided to finish the full course of school. Going to class seemed more fun than getting a job. In her senior year of high school, Lucy had a remarkably good figure. High breasts, lush hips, long legs. Boys began to chase after her, and her mother repeatedly remarked that it was better to marry early than to go out with one or the other. "Choose a better guy and go with God," my mother told me. "You'll take care of the household and bring up the children. And let your man take a job on a shift somewhere, earning money." Such a fate seemed ideal to her mother, especially since she had seen several examples before her eyes. There were very few jobs for women in the village, such as saleswoman, postmistress, and even then, you still had to get a job, and there was a queue for all these jobs. Another thing was to take the money earned by her husband and not to bow down to strangers. But life decided otherwise. Unexpectedly for herself, Lucy had an affair with Harvey. He was nearly twice her age, had buried his first wife, and had become a kind of hermit. You had to go all the way through the village and deep into the woods to find the path that led to his hut. Harvey was the best hunter in the village, and he was the one they ordered the meat that could not be found in the stores. He was good with the woods, and a good-looking man, and many women would have gone to his sturdy, self-built house. But one day he ran into Lucy at the store, and they got to talking and joking. "You're supposed to see the girls off, but I'll let you see me off," Harvey said. "See how I live." Lucy felt that this man was a head taller than the boys who were after her. He took care of Lucy and looked after her so that she, who had never known real love, neither parental nor the kind of love they write about in books, was drawn to him. But her mother met the news that Lucy was getting married with fear. "You don't know what you're in for," she said. "Harvey's house is nice, I'll grant you that, but he'll tear you away from people. It's easy to sit in a den at a young age with nowhere to go, and if you need anything, you'll have to go 3 miles away for the essentials." But Lucy was caught up in the wind, and right after graduation, she signed with Harvey and moved to his cabin in the woods, telling her mother goodbye. "Don't be sad for me, you've got 3 brothers to raise. Thank you for not putting me in an orphanage." They even cried on each other's shoulder, but Lucy could not afford to prolong this scene. Her husband was waiting for her. A new life had begun. At first, Lucy enjoyed being the mistress of the spacious, clean hut. Harvey had enough money, and soon the young wife had transformed the house beyond recognition, and now she could feel a woman's hand in the house. But the months passed. Summer was followed by fall, and Lucy began to grow bored. Now she understood her mother's words more and more. Indeed, she had locked herself in these 4 walls, sitting here alone. Harvey had a job every day. When he wasn't hunting, he was fishing, and he was building a new bathhouse and a large cellar. Lucy wondered what her husband's plans were for the future. It was understandable to her if he decided to save up some money and then sell his forestry and move somewhere else, maybe to the sea, to a warm place. But after having a conversation about it once, then another, she realized that her husband wasn't going to change anything. "Look how nice it is here," Harvey urged. "Freedom. No neighbors on all sides, no squabbling, no arguments, no drunken fights. Everything's ours, no one's in charge. Just birds singing and pine trees making noise. And what about the sea? I was once in Sochi, in the army. We were doing construction work there. The people will seem like herrings in a barrel. Everywhere you go, you have to pay money and overpriced. No, you can't lure there." But he himself thought anxiously that the young wife was bored. Maybe some of the relatives would agree to come and keep her company. Or else Lucy wouldn't be able to stand it. She would run away. For the time being, the young woman went to see her mother a couple of times a month. Each time she asked if she had heard anything about Catherine, but there was no news. Even if Lucy met Natalie on the street, she could only say that Catherine was graduating from college and still dreamed of going to college. And on her next visit, Lucy ran in to see the paramedic at the hospital, after which she told her mother, "Well, that's right, I wasn't wrong. You'll soon have a grandson or granddaughter." She didn't seem like the kind of mother who would make a doting grandmother, having babysat her own children in her time. Her mother showed her concern for Lucy by drawing her eyebrows together and asking, "At least come home for these months. You don't know what's gonna go wrong." "The ambulance takes 5 hours to get to our village, by the way," Lucy replied, "because there's only one ambulance and a lot of calls. So if you think about bad things, you should move to the city and rent a room opposite the medical center. Don't worry, I'm young and healthy, everything will be fine." One thing neither Lucy nor her mother could predict. Maybe the young woman's hormones were acting unpredictably, but she was getting more and more nervous and crying, and reached for alcohol to comfort herself. Literally, Harvey always had alcohol, and soon Lucy couldn't do without taking a little of it at bedtime. How it would affect the baby worried her less and less. Literally, Harvey always had alcohol, and soon Lucy couldn't do without taking a little of it at bedtime. How it would affect the baby worried her less and less. In the end, the mother almost by force took her daughter to her house shortly before her due date, and Lucy was delivered by a village midwife. The boy Tony was born, lightweight, weak, but seemingly without significant abnormalities. Luckily, Lucy realized that such a tiny baby did not belong in a forest hut and lived with her son in the village until May came and it was warm. These months were difficult for her. On the one hand, there was some life and people around. There were 15 stores in the village alone. True, most of them were tiny in old wooden houses or even in carriages. But there was also a magnet and a piataraka. What you need you can go and buy. Harvey brought in money. And socializing while you walk along the streets, you're bound to meet people you know, and it's like reading a newspaper. They'll tell you all the news, all the gossip. On the other hand, her brothers were growing up, and the small house was cramped, and her mother, with whom Lucy had never found common ground, loaded her with work. "Come on, I'll sit with Tony, and you go to the garden. Milk the goats. Get some water. We've got laundry to do today. Big cleaning." And Lucy had gotten used to being bossed around. Lately, she had only had to take care of her husband, but now she had so many other things to take care of. She had to nurse little Tony and work for the good of the family. And if at home, it was partly redeemed by the fact that Harvey loved and appreciated his wife, but here Lucy saw no gratitude. Everyone took the results of her labor for granted. Her brothers didn't even wash their plates. and try every day not only to prepare the food, but also to wash all the dishes when the water must be carried from the column. Lucy felt like a servant for the first time, and she didn't like it. She wished even more fervently that her life could be different. Lucy realized that she couldn't do much on her own. No profession, a small child in her arms. But if Harvey wanted to, she decided, when she got home, to persuade him to move elsewhere. Some big city. Harvey's a handyman, he'll find work. And when her son's a little older, Lucy will learn something too. Why not become a cook, for instance? Get a job in a cafe or even in a restaurant and earn money, and food at home will be, and the environment around is certainly not a wooden hut with cockroaches, which cannot be removed. These plans seemed achievable, but it happened that Lucy met a neighbor who told her the news about her ex-girlfriend. "Do you know about Catherine?" she asked. "What's the matter?" said Lucy. For some reason, she wanted Catherine to have some misfortune to make her friend's life even worse than her own. Then all of Lucy's actions would seem to be justified. Yekaterina was supposed to be smart, and everything went wrong for her. Didn't she want to go to medical school? Well, she didn't. She graduated with a red diploma, got married, and came to our district center. They say she went on a wedding trip to Italy, and now she and her husband have such a nice house. Yekaterina got a job at the hospital, and the people there were very keen on her. They promised to give her a target referral to the institute in a couple of years, so that she would get in for sure. But I don't know what plans she has for the future. She is expecting a child now. Does he come here? Lucy asked. She convinces Natalie to sell her place here and move to the district center to live together. I think there's a house for sale next door to Cadius. But until it works out, of course, Catherine will visit her mother, so you'll meet her here many times. Lucy went to her room, and her heart was bitter. It seemed to her fair that fate should equalize them with Catherine in some respects. For instance, if Lucy had had a poor childhood, and Catherine had had a well-to-do one, then let fate deal her at least some blow. At least let her have no children. But no, Catherine got everything from life. Even abroad has already been abroad, and Lucy could not dream of it. And she probably already has a car. And the child's parents will take her to the sea every year. And Tony will only have a forest around and nothing else. Lucy imagined the scene. Somewhere in the same store, where she is filling a basket with cereal, pasta, and butter, she meets Catherine. She is dressed up. Her purchases are a cake and a bottle of wine, and even that she doesn't have to carry in her hands. Her car is waiting for her, and she offers Lucy a ride. And everyone's watching. It's a picture. One friend has achieved everything she wanted, and the other, no matter how hard she fought, has not managed to rise in this life. "I'm coming home," Lucy announced to her mother. And no matter how much she protested, her daughter's decision was adamant. Harvey was glad he missed his family. When his wife and son arrived, he made everything as comfortable as possible for them. He made a crib so big he didn't even need a crib. A bathtub for the baby, a cupboard to store the baby's things. He took care of everything. But if Lucy for some time was kept in frames, she did not dare to drink in front of her mother. She would have smelled alcohol a mile away, and Lucy would not be well. But now all the brakes were removed. Now, as soon as Harvey left in the morning, Lucy would pour herself a glass and drink it in 2 sips while doing her chores. Then came another drink, and then another. Often her husband would return and find the young woman asleep. And yet he didn't have the heart to reproach her. He loved her very much. And so it went on until disaster struck. Wet and hungry, Tony fidgeted in his crib, but failed to wake his mother with his cries. The baby ended up just falling on the floor. And in the evening, when his father returned, he was still crying, and his hand was swollen, and he wouldn't let her touch it. "I'd only looked away for a moment," Lucy said, averting her eyes. "He's getting so fast, you can't keep track." But Harvey kept looking at his wife, and she realized that he had guessed everything. "I'll go to the hospital with him tomorrow," Lucy declared. "No, we can't wait here." Harvey got up. "I'm going to call a friend. He'll pick us up in his car, and we'll go to the hospital." Lucy was horrified at the prospect. It would be a nightmare if she were to be put with the baby. And the doctors will attack her, will call her an irresponsible mother, and things she has no suitable will be in the ward, will look the most shabby, and most importantly, it is the fiefdom of Catherine, will have to bow to her, to play the former friendship. But on the other hand, she did not know how to explain to her husband that she did not want to go to the doctors. While Lucy was trying to think of something, Harvey called a friend, told his wife to pack the child, and an hour later, they were already at the district hospital. Tony's arm was broken, but Lucy's darkest premonitions did not come true. Catherine was out of work and had recently given birth to a daughter. Not long ago, Lucy would have taken the opportunity to seek her, and Catherine would have run to her, of course, to bring her the program. And how many things they would have found to chat about. But now the young woman wanted only one thing, that they should not meet. And they didn't. When Lucy and her son were discharged home, she found that there was no more alcohol in the house. "You thought you were hiding from me, but I knew everything. I thought maybe you'd bond with your kid, stop drinking. Turns out you killed Tony for what you want. I'm telling you something, Lucy, I'm serious. I grew up here, this is my life, and I'm not going anywhere. And if you're sick of it, if you can't stay here with me, there's God, as they say, and there's the threshold. But I can't rely on you, and I'm not giving you Tony." "What are you going to do with him?" Lucy asked ironically, though in her heart she was afraid. "I'll find another woman," Harvey said simply, "someone to raise my son and be my friend. It's not easy to find one, but I can do it. So think about it, please, and don't count on the court. No matter how hard you try, I'll sue you for the baby. The doctors at the hospital were afraid to put you with a boy. You were barely on your feet, and alcohol stinks a mile away. So there are witnesses." Lucy knew what Harvey said she would do. For the first time in her life, she had to pull herself together, and life began to get back on track. Tony grew up, and his father loved him more and more. As soon as the boy started to walk well, his father started taking him with him. First on small trips to the forest, where he familiarized him with trees, bushes and herbs, with all kinds of animals and birds. Soon Tony could distinguish unmistakably the voices of birds, knew which bird was nesting in which nest and which eggs were being laid. He understood mushrooms and berries, distinguishing edible from poisonous. But it turned out that the boy liked drawing the most. Realizing that his son would be bored without friends, Harvey brought children's books, paints, pencils, and albums. At first, Tony had nothing to do but copy pictures from books. He especially liked to do it in the long fall and long evenings. Mother and father began to marvel at what a son has a steady hand and an accurate eye. The drawings turned out no worse than the originals, and his mother hung them on the walls. And when he got older, Tony began to draw from life. No one taught him. He somehow got to everything by himself. And he liked much better than going hunting with his father to find some beautiful corner in the forest and sit there with his sketchbook. And yet there was a special bond between father and son. Harvey devoted every spare moment to Tony. When it was time for the boy to go to school, his father did not want to send him to boarding school. It was agreed that he would tutor Tony himself, so the boy would be homeschooled. For the time being, Harvey said, "When the boy gets older, you can't do anything about it. We'll figure out a way to organize his studies. Maybe we'll send him to your mother's for a while. Grandmother's place is better than the government's." However, these plans were not to be realized. Naomi died before her grandson finished high school. Of course, the house was not empty. Lucy's brothers took it over, but none of them would take the boy in. They rarely saw him, and he was practically a stranger to them. But the biggest disaster came a little later. Before New Year's Eve, father and son went on a long fishing trip. Harvey wanted to treat the family to a good fish on the holiday table. That the weather would change so suddenly and abruptly no one had foreseen. And Lucy found herself trapped, outside in the cold and blizzard, with no family around. She tried to call one of Harvey's acquaintances, but the connection was a mess. The young woman would run out of the house, make her way to the gate, and crying, try to see something in the thickening darkness. Then she returned home, fell exhaustively on her bed, and sobbed into her pillow. It was not until the next day, when the blizzard abated and Harvey and Tony had not returned, that a search for them was organized. Lucy knew which lake they had gone to and hoped that they had not lost their way, having decided to return when the blizzard began. But no, the man and the boy were found quite quickly. Harvey had dug a sort of cave in the snow and wrapped his son in warm clothes he had taken off himself. Maybe he hoped he was a hardened man who would survive, or maybe he didn't care anymore and wanted only to save his son at any cost. Anyway, he froze to death, and Tony was sent to the hospital in serious condition. His fingers and toes had to be amputated, and the doctors did not guarantee that this would be the end of it. This time Lucy was not admitted to the hospital with her son. The boy was considered big enough to be in the ward on his own. But she didn't care about that. She had to organize the funeral, the wake, and think about what to do next. And while Lucy had held her own in recent years and had not taken alcohol in her mouth, now she had fallen into a state of prostration and her old habits began to return. Tony was having a very hard time. Even though he had been given painkillers, his bandaged arms and legs hurt a lot. He could not entertain himself with anything, neither turn the pages of a book, nor draw. It was a strange, unfamiliar environment, and even his mother, to whom he was not so attached, was not around. Once Tony heard one of the nurses call him Mowgli. He was a completely wild boy from the forest. But he had already read the book, and he was offended to hear such a nickname. Aunt Catherine, the head nurse, felt sorry for him most of all. She found time to do her nursing duties when it came to Tony, feeding him from a spoon, serving him a vessel. It was like she was his own aunt. And when Tony felt a little better, when the pain began to recede and the longing for his father and home came first, Aunt Catherine said, "I'll bring you my Barbara tomorrow. It'll be more fun." And indeed, the next day she brought her daughter Barbara to the hospital. The girl was a little younger than Tony, but still the same age. He was even afraid he was sure they wouldn't be able to be friends. The girl was so pretty, dressed up, with blonde pigtails, and he himself looked like a man who should have been frightened away. Frostbitten face, bandaged limbs. But Barbara acted friendly and easy. She sat down on the chair next to the bed. "Mom told me you have such an interesting life," she began. Tony glanced at her apprehensively. Maybe she'd think he was a wild Mowgli too. "You're lucky," Barbara said. "Not lucky that you went to the hospital, of course, but lucky that you live in the woods with animals. My mom only let me have a cat. She's really smart and, she has a sense of responsibility. We took her when she was very young. She just learned to drink milk. And now she comes out of the house in the mornings before everyone else, runs through the yard, looks in the garden, in the manger, in the barn. Not a single mouse left. And what song she sings. I wanted to ask you, do we have wolves in the woods? My dad took me to the zoo and showed me a wolf. I don't think he's scary at all, just like a dog. My dad said that you should be afraid of wolves when they gather in packs." Tony had a lot to say on the subject of animals, and soon he found himself talking to the girl at ease, and she was asking him more and more questions, and it was obvious that she was interested in listening to him. Then Barbara snapped to attention. "I'm silly. My mom gave me different presents, and I forgot to give you a treat." She pulled an appetizing smelling container of food out of the bag, and Tony looked embarrassed, and Barbara noticed it. "Let's play like you're a wounded warrior and I'm a nurse and I'm taking care of you. I need to feed you, okay?" And Tony had no choice but to nod. They were talking and playing a game, and so the time flew by before the end of the working day. Catherine went to pick up her daughter and they had to go home. "Will you come again?" Tony asked her so hopefully that Barbara looked at her mother questioningly. "Can we do that?" "Tony, she'll definitely come, just on the weekends, okay? I mean, Barbara goes to school, and then she does her homework at home. And it's not like I can come pick her up, bring her here, then take her back. But on Saturday and Sunday, Barbara will visit you. I'm glad you two are becoming friends. So what can I get you next time? Would you like a brownie or some fruit?" Barbara wanted to tell her mother how amazed she was that Tony had seen and tasted tangerines from her hands for the first time in his life. But she looked at the boy and restrained herself from speaking so as not to embarrass her buddy. Barbara was a tactful girl, and Catherine patted Tony on the head. She wanted to caress him all the time, as if she felt that the boy was neglected at home. She was also aware of how difficult his life would be, and how much effort he would have to make not to feel sorry for himself, but to learn to enjoy what was available to him. She knew his father only a little, but she liked Harvey. He seemed responsible, kind, and considerate. If he were still alive, he would be a support for his son. But what would it be like for Tony with a mother whose behavior was impossible to predict? And for Lucy, it is also a challenge to suddenly find herself with an invalid son in her arms. Barbara didn't want to wait for the next weekend and came up with a solution. When she came home from school, she tried to do her homework as soon as possible. And if she could do them quickly, she asked her grandmother to take her to the hospital. And she herself felt sorry for the boy and was sure to collect him a transfer. Already in the store, she picked up something for the sick. She put bananas in a basket or chocolate. At home, she baked pies. But Tony was not waiting for Barbara because of the goodies, although he was always happy to receive them. For the first time, he had a friend with whom they could speak the same language. Grown-ups are different after all. Barbara's stories opened up a whole world for him. The girl had already been somewhere with her parents. She told Tony about the sea in southern cities, about the train they traveled back and forth, even about her ordinary life, about school, about teachers and boys, about her strict grandmother who made her rewrite her homework if there was a single mark in her notebook. Tony had none of that, and he listened mesmerized. He himself was desperate to draw. It was his nature to pour all his impressions and feelings onto paper. But then he clearly realized that he could no longer draw as before. An adult would have given up, but childhood doesn't know the word no. Tony began to think that maybe he could learn to hold a brush or a pencil in his teeth. She even wanted to ask Barbara to bring him some pencils and a sketchbook. But he was shy. He foresaw that he wouldn't succeed at first, and he didn't want to show her the helpless, clumsy drawings. Then an incident happened that both of them remembered. In a small district hospital there was no children's ward, and here on the floor there was a boy who had had his appendix removed. When his friends visited him, he took them to see Mowgli. Many people associated Tony with this literary hero. It was a good thing Barbara was beside the boy at that moment. She and Tony were playing peacefully when the door swung open. There were several boys standing in the hallway, and one of them, in striped pajamas, pointed at Tony. Here he is, this wild one. Honestly, they found him in the woods. He was attacking people. That's why his hands were cut off. The boys watched with avid curiosity. Tony was confused with surprise. Barbara clenched her fists. Get out of here. Why what? Then Barbara sprang to the door. Before the boys could enter the room, she slammed the door so hard that it hit one of the mockers in the face. He howled in pain, and it was clear that the whole pack was going to attack the girl. Tony struggled to rise, but then Barbara squealed so shrilly and on such a high note that the footsteps of running nurses were immediately heard in the corridor. They could have beaten you up, said Tony to his friend as the mischievous boys were led away to another room. The girl shrugged. So what, you're just gonna give up? It's kind of disgusting to clutch your paws when you're being treated so meanly. Tony remembered her words many times later. His own mother visited him only once, shortly before he was discharged. She brought him a bag of gingerbread, which was the usual treat they bought him at home. Tony had seen so many new things lately that he thought his old life was behind him and he would never return to it. But here she was, his mother, sitting beside him in her fur coat that exuded familiar smells. She seemed a stranger here. Her place was out there in the woods. So how are you feeling? Asked the mother awkwardly. It hardly hurts anymore, he replied cautiously. Indeed, compared to the pain he had experienced in the first few days, Tony had nothing to complain about now. Did they take away all your fingers? My mother said. Tony's hands were bandaged, so Lucy hadn't seen what they looked like yet. All, answered he. So what do we do now? It was his mother who asked him. Tony was afraid to think about how to live his life. And most of all, he didn't want to be alone with his mother. She'd forget to prepare the food. If his father didn't remind him, little Tony would often go hungry. Then he learned to cook the simplest things himself. And now how? You'll have to worry about your pension. My mother decided you'll get an invalidity group. Then you'll get a survivor's pension for your father. I won't send you to boarding school. What's good in a boarding school among strangers? Maybe you'll give it to me? Tony suddenly asked. I'm no help to you now, only a burden. Come on, my mother said. We'll get by somehow. And strangers will only abuse a cripple. So come on, son. Will you get better? We'll get all the papers and I'll take you home. We should think about it. Maybe we'll sell the house and buy somewhere in the country. Tony felt sorry for the house his father had built, but he realized that his mother could hardly manage the household alone. And to live away from people when he could not help her in anything was not a good thing. No matter what, he had to move. You tell me at least how the funeral went, he asked. If they pay me money, let's put a nice monument to my father. Don't feel rich just yet. There was a sneer in his mother's voice. The dead, Tony, don't mean anything. It's the living. My father saved me, Tony said quietly. If it wasn't for him? Suddenly he realized that if his mother had to choose between the two of them, she would definitely prefer his father to survive, especially since the son was crippled. Barbara was also thinking about the fate of her new friend. Until then, she had lived a measured life, where every day brought some small joys. She loved both her parents equally. Her father worked as a veterinarian and often allowed his daughter to accompany him on trips. And Barbara, even though she was still a little girl, thought that when she grew up, she would also treat people or animals. And she wanted to heal Tony too. But what alarmed her most was that whenever she visited her friend, she never had visitors. Neither friends nor, even more strangely, his mother. "Mom, let's take him for ourselves," she asked Catherine, "and Tony will be good, and I have more fun." "But who would give him to us?" Ekaterina's voice sounded unusually serious and sad. "He has a mother. She has other plans for her son." "Well, maybe we'll take him with us for the summer, eh? His mom doesn't take him anywhere. We'll take him to the sea. It'll be good for him, won't it, Mom?" "We'll see there, Barbara," and Catherine turned the conversation to another topic. Meanwhile, Lucy began to carry out her plan. She acted inefficiently, but she had the desire, but no worldly sense. Tony was indeed granted a disability group and a pension. The money was to be put on a card. But the sale of the house didn't go well. Everyone recognized that it was a good house, but there was no second Harvey willing to settle in the middle of nowhere. The offers came in such a way that they could not be called anything but mockery. Somebody offered to buy the hut for scrap, for a pittance, which Lucy would not have enough for the poorest house in the village. Somebody wanted to set up a hunting hut here to keep warm in winter and sleep in summer, and they gave sense too. So Lucy, when Tony was discharged, brought him back to his old home. "I won't be in a hurry to sell it," she said. "I don't want to go too cheap. Your father put his heart and soul into this house when he built it." But now she had all the household chores that her father had previously taken on. So she warned Tony, "I'll cook food, but I don't have time to take care of you, to feed you, to drink you, so learn to eat on your own." And the boy started, as they would say it now, developing self-care skills. He not only learned to cope with many things without help, but also did some simple housework. Often things would fall on the floor, sometimes broken. Lucy would swear, but most of all Tony didn't want to feel like a helpless invalid. He knew that Barbara would not come to visit him here in the forest hut. So he asked his mother, "Let's save from my pension. Maybe there's some transportation for people like me. We can go to the village or even to the district center. I'm responsible for you now, so I'm going to spend it as I see fit." Tony's eyelashes fluttered resentfully. His father had never spoken to him like that, not even when he was very young. His mother seemed to have taken a dismissive tone once and for all. But the worst of it was that, seeing no prospects, Lucy began to drink again, and the more she got involved, the more she dreaded going back to the village. You can't hide the fact that you're drunk from morning till night. There would be commissions. She remembered well how it had been for her. Tony would eventually be taken away from her and put in some boarding school. Or worse, there'd be a family who want to adopt him. They'll take the pension. And what would Lucy have to live on? She'll be despised in the village. She lives in a poor family, has no parental rights, drinks every day. Compared to Catherine, she's a real bottom. And there'll be nothing to drink on. It's a vicious circle. She won't get a job because she's an alcoholic, and there's no money to buy alcohol. It's a very bleak prospect. And Lucy had an idea. One day she worked from morning till evening, clearing the cellar of all the things that had accumulated in it. Then she brought in a mattress, a low stool, and most importantly, she securely fastened a long dog chain to the wall, 10 meters long. God knows how it got there. Harvey had never had a dog on a chain, so the chain was rusty and heavy. Tony was lured into the basement by his mother without telling him anything, but she had to outline his future when she chained him by the leg. "You're to sit here," she said, "and you're to be quiet. You know how hard it is with you right now. I can't take it anymore, so you better get over it. I'll bring you food. I'll pour the garbage behind you. You won't die." Tony didn't believe it at first. He could see that his mother was drunk again, and when she had too much to drink, it happened to her. She had a temper, and sometimes she could say the most outrageous things. He figured she had a bad day, and it would all blow over soon. Tomorrow, or maybe today. In a few hours she would cool down, let him off the chain, and even ask for forgiveness. All we have to do is not to annoy her. But Lucy took the decision to hide her son from the world seriously. At first, when it first flashed through her mind, it had seemed wild. But once she'd gotten used to the idea, she would feed and water Tony. "He's young, he won't die." She would withdraw money from his card for what she needed. Of course, from time to time, she would be asked about the fate of her son. But in the village, everyone was her own. They would take her word for it that everything was all right with the boy. It was a common practice here, and the post office could give a registered letter not to the addressee, but to his neighbor, who promised that he would take the envelope to the address. And family members received money for each other. Sometimes the granddaughter signed for the grandmother in the statement. It's all about trust. Hardly anyone dares to go that far into the woods to check their suspicions. They didn't buy Lucy's house, didn't put a real price on it. Well, that's a good thing. No one to stop her from living the life she wanted. And knowing Tony, she was sure that her son would not scandalize, scream. He would cry and realize that his life was not the worst for a cripple. He's fed and fed, warm. He'll get by without the rest. Lucy did not look far ahead. She would keep her secret from the others as long as she could, and then she would see. Tony never thought his world would shrink to 4 walls, the same basement he used to love so much. It was where the pickles were kept in barrels, and his mother used to send him to get some pickles, mushrooms, sauerkraut, or pickles for supper. On the way, God himself commanded to eat a small pear or a pimpled cucumber. And long shadows danced on the wall, so that the artist's imagination told Tony different scary stories. Now the barrels were empty, and the lantern was a blackmail tool. If Tony behaved badly from his mother's point of view, she would take the lantern away, leaving the boy in the dark. Then all he could do was lie on the mattress, crying or imagining stories to distract himself. And vice versa, in good moments his mother could make him happy, bring him paper, pencils. "Don't waste the album too much," she said. "I won't be going to the village soon to get a new one." Draw in a corner of the sheet, then in another corner, and on both sides. In such moments of enlightenment, she was not averse to fixing a broken pencil, and could be generous with some other gift. The Petrovs are throwing away their books. She shared village news. The children are grown up now. They don't need textbooks, and they don't read anything else at all. The telephone has replaced everything now. So they said, "You want to take it, Aunt Lucy, or we'll take it to the dumpster. I know you like to read, so I brought you a few." At times like this, Tony was almost happy. He had several days of reading ahead of him, when his imagination would take him from the damp cellar to another world. It was useless to ask his mother for anything else. At first, he offered her different options. "Mom, if it's hard for you, I'll go live with one of my uncles. They need you." "No, really, I'll be able to help them someday. I'll learn. At least look after the kids. No one will take you," my mother said, like a cutoff. "Not my brothers, not your father's friends. You see, no one comes here. They've forgotten about us. Who would willingly take a cripple? Think about it. Well, then to boarding school. I'll study there. Don't make it up. Nobody teaches people like you there. They lie in their beds, dirty, wet, and the nurse won't come to change their underwear. And they give them pills to keep them quiet and not to complain. These pills make them stop thinking at all. They just lie there drooling." Tony twitched, and in utter desperation, he was already speaking. "Well, our own shouts at the church. At least there. Old men live there, old women. And I'll be there." "What's wrong with you?" Mother snapped at me. "Are you hungry?" "No, you haven't even finished your porridge. You draw whenever you want." "What else do you want? Tell me." Tony sighed deeply. "I want to get out," he said with inexpressible longing, "to look around, to look at the world, to look at the world. What's there to see? Nothing's changed. Same trees standing around. You should have just stayed put." But Tony seemed to understand the reasoning behind it, and one time he pleaded, "Let me sign some paper once and for all that all the money I'm entitled to I give it to you. Do what you want with it, and let me go." He must have hit a sore spot here, because his mother gave him a slap that made his teeth clatter. "Where will you go?" she shouted, rousing herself. "Into the forest to starve to death? Or begging? I'm so good. I gave all the money to my mom. Now give me a cripple with no arms for breadcrumbs? Is that it?" That time she left with the lantern and did not return for a long time. No drawing, no reading. Tony was so sad that his flat, hard pillow was soaking wet. He choked on tears and snot until he was exhausted and fell asleep. He never asked his mother for freedom again. He knew it would make things worse. He slowly began to get better at drawing. Only the paints were easier to work with. He had already learned to hold the brush in his teeth, and now his drawings no longer resembled the scrawl of a 3-year-old child. Sometimes, when his mother forgot to pour him fresh water, he would rinse the brush in the water that was meant for drinking, and then he would drink the water, which smelled of paints, and he would get all tattered. Time passed, He formed a kind of alliance with his mother, a monstrous one, but a monstrous one nonetheless. Since the woman lived alone upstairs in the house, she wanted to talk from time to time. Then she opened the door to the cellar, sat down on the top step. At such times she was often drunk, and she was afraid to go down on unsteady legs. One could roll down and then not get out, and began to tell Tony the news of village life: who died, who was born, who got married, who moved, what they sell in what store, and how much. And although all this news had nothing to do with him now, Tony was still glad to listen to it. It was the sound of a living human voice, and the realization that somewhere there was life going on. People were still doing their jobs, and the whole world had not collapsed. Tony no longer hoped to get out of here, but he was happy for others, especially if something good happened to someone. The priest had his fourth child, the school principal had finally retired, and now she was going to work in the vegetable garden, and the store had brought in cheap flour. But since there was nothing to tell, my mother, under a drunken bar, was drawn to philosophy. "Here, tell me, why do I have such a fate?" she asked Tony. "All in my family drank. No one cared about me." And for the 1,000th time she began to tell how she had almost been taken away from her mother to an orphanage. I could have studied too, and Tony had heard that story many times. I could have gone to the city like some people. I was so good, I could memorize poems and recite them with such an expression that the teacher cried. Now I'd be working in a library somewhere, and my husband would be alive, and my child would be safe, and not all this. Lucy waved her hand and began to cry bitterly, her head in her lap. At such times she looked old and ugly, and Tony felt sorry for her. At the same time he realized that by the word "some" his mother meant her sworn friend Catherine. But she never mentioned her out loud. Neither her nor, for that matter, her daughter. "How's Barbara doing?" he asked one day. The mother wrinkled her forehead. "Barbara who?" "The daughter of Catherine, the nurse from the hospital," he explained quietly. Mother was in a good mood, so she condescended to answer. She had a brother. Catherine gave birth to a boy. "So your Varika will take care of him." "Catherine doesn't have time, she's at work all day. Although there's a grandmother there too, so there's support from all sides, so to speak." My mother puffed on her cigarette, her face becoming unkind. I'm sure she was thinking again about why some people get everything and others nothing. Then she dropped the cigarette butt and left, remembering to lock the cellar door. The first time Tony had come here, he had hoped that Barbara would somehow get him out. He'd been worried about where he was, and they'd look for him and find him chained up in the basement. He even mentally called out to Barbara, and it seemed to him that sooner or later she would hear the call. There are telepaths, hypnotists. Barbara had told him about them once. What if he had a talent for it too? In any case, his desire to get out of the dark cage was passionate. But days, weeks, months, and years went by, and nothing happened. Once a week his mother would come down to take away his dirty laundry and bring him clean ones instead. That's when she was sober. But when she was very drunk, she might not show up for long periods of time. Or she'd unlock the door and she'd be on her feet. Then she'd just throw down some food, pieces of bread, boiled potatoes. He'd pick it up and eat it. Water was worse. Sometimes we had to be thirsty for days. When Lucy would get out to the village and was asked about her son, she would say that Harvey's aunt had taken the boy. She works at the hospital herself, so she took care of the invalid. There the boy is provided with food and treatment. In addition, she sends in most of his pension, leaving only bread for herself. Lucy thought she looked noble, however, at times she began to be embarrassed. "You're not just buying bread, you're buying vodka. Probably all the boy's pension is spent on your booze. It's a good thing a relative took Tony in for support. Aren't you ashamed to live on an orphan's pension? You should get a job, Lucy." But the woman didn't even consider that option. She couldn't bring herself to do anything she didn't want to do a long time ago. And with her job, if she missed a day, she'd be fired. Besides, who in their right mind would hire her, seeing the unhealthy bluish color of her swollen face, which gave her away as a chronic alcoholic? Catherine was told by Lucy that she had sent her son far away from here, and Catherine had told her daughter about it. Barbara sighed deeply. She realized that she would probably never see Tony again. What a pity. She was worried about him, how his fate would turn out. And Tony developed a friendship with wolves. Yes, his father had taught him to imitate the wolf's howl. And now, when his mother would go to the village, he'd sometimes raise his voice and the wolves would answer him. They have excellent hearing. If only I knew what they were telling him. It wouldn't have worked in front of his mother, and she'd already almost beaten Tony for it. Why are you baiting predators? We live out here in the middle of nowhere, away from people. No protection from you. You want them to eat me. Who will bring you food then, you unscrupulous? Now Tony knew that his whole life would be spent here, in this basement, and he just wanted it to be over soon. The village boys learned about the ghost in the forest from Archie. He was a hereditary mushroom picker. His mother had raised him alone, and mushrooms were an important part of her income. She knew all the places in the county where the most expensive whites grew, the kings of mushrooms. And at dawn, she'd drive around on her scooter. She never sold them in the village. No one would give her a real price. I took the mushrooms to town, but not all of them. She dried some of them and sent them by mail. She had regular customers. Archie specialized in the simpler mushrooms, such as aspenberries and potberozovics. His mother regularly took him to the hospital for encephalitis vaccinations, because Archie was climbing into thickets where it was hard not to pick up a tick. And this time, in addition to mushrooms, he had one more prey of an amazing imagination bake. I was already going home, and I thought I wouldn't make it to the road before dark. If only to get there, maybe someone would give me a lift. Well, I'm not surprised that wolves howl in the distance. I often hear them. But never once have they attacked me in summer. They go deep into the forest at that time, shun people. They have wolf cubs. And then I passed this hut, not everyone can find it. The one where the hunter died and his woman stayed. The house is dark and there's a howl. What a howl! It was either a man or a beast, and those wolves in the forest answered him. I threw everything, mushrooms, everything that hindered my way. I ran all the way to the road, and I'm afraid to look back. And the worst thing is that I can't see the ground under my feet. It's already dark. I think I'll stumble, fall, it'll grab me. Someone tried to make fun of Archie, saying he was a big guy and made up such nonsense. But the other boys didn't support him. They were all terribly excited. They knew Archie wasn't inclined to lie, and he wasn't afraid of much. If he met a real wolf pack, he'd think of something. Climb a tree, call for help from there. But he wouldn't have lost his nerve. But here, he was struck with real terror. Let's go over there. Somebody's on fire. You got a big mouth. You're telling me you wouldn't be afraid to go out there at night. I mean, who's gonna let you in the first place? Billy was the most desperate of them all, day and all. Well, we'll have to see what's going on. Who will appear to you in the daytime? Is the ghost a fool or what? I don't know what kind of brains he's got, but his folks won't let any of us out of the house at night anyway. I've heard about this hut, but I've never been up there. Could it be the spirit of a dead hunter? Harry, the youngest of them, suggested. What? He turned into a wolf and went to his woman's house to scare her. With laughter, they tried to drive away their fear, for by this time they had already decided that they would go into the forest and try to find out if there was anything strange connected with the ghost in the hut or near it. We just have to wait for Lucy, the hunter's wife, to come to the village, because she won't let us in her yard and barn to look at everything. She'll kick us out. So we wait for her to show up, while she goes to the store, while she visits her family, and we go back and forth. From then on, they watched for the moment when Lucy would come to the village. She usually showed up at least once every 7 to 10 days, and she stayed for a long time. At first, she would go to the magnet and take the cheapest of the hard liquor, but I didn't stock up on food here. For this purpose, there was a small private grocery store where saleswomen often let villagers buy food on credit, writing down in a thick notebook from whom how much is due. There were those who accumulated debts from pension to pension, then paying for everything at once. But Lucy was not welcome here because it was very difficult for her to resist temptation. If she had recently received her son's money, it was simply impossible for her to pay off the sales clerks and thus cut herself off from vodka. The next time she asked in the cherry tree, as the store was called, "Medicines are so expensive now, I bought some for myself, and there are only a few cents left. I'd like some bread, a cheap sausage, and some butter. Give it to me, will you? I'll come back on Wednesday. I'll be sure to cry." "You have good medicines." The saleswoman Elizaveta pulled out a notebook, 40-degree strength, no other way. Look, you already owe 5,000. What are you gonna pay with? You said yourself that you send almost everything to your son. And don't take pity, the shopkeeper told us not to lend you anything more. Lucy was rubbing the collar of her dress and was slow to leave. "Girls, maybe I'll cry with mushroom tea. You give me at least a little flour now, and I'll bring you some porcini mushrooms, fresh or dried. Usually the sales clerk would take a bag of flour off the shelf with a wave of her hand and give it to Lucy. It was clear that she was not the kind of beggar who had a bank account, and to send her out of the door was really to condemn her to starvation. And the saleswomen were well aware that she could not control her passion for the bottle. One had a husband who drank, another had a father who drank. From the store, Lucy went to her brother's house. She was not welcome there either, but again she got something. In summer it was surplus crops, overripe cucumbers and zucchini, cracked tomatoes and cabbages, rotten apples, in winter small potatoes and onions. Often the brothers' wives would give the women the clothes they would no longer wear themselves, but in the woods it was the best thing. Who could see Lucy there? After she had loaded herself up and felt like a miner, Lucy would go back. She rested often on the way back. Her body was beginning to give up, her heart was getting worse. Sometimes she thought that she might die overnight and was afraid that she wouldn't be able to get Tony off the chain in time. On the other hand, who would want him without her? She sincerely believed that if now her son's life was a dog's life, it would be even worse in some boarding school. And if that was the case, it was better for both of them to leave at about the same time. Billy was the first to see Lucy coming out of the magnet, and he rushed to gather the other guys. Now they had a few hours to spare. And soon the little brute was moving into the woods. Only Archie was hard to persuade. To everyone's surprise, he was more frightened by the mysterious howl than they had realized. It seemed that he was ready not to go to the side of the woods where the hunting hut stood. The boys would have given up on him. But he was a slave, as they say, not a worshiper. But they had no confidence that they would find the place for themselves. Archie knew the place better than any of them, and he had never been lost. "Did you bring anything with you?" Archie asked. He wasn't understood. A few moments later, Harry, the most sensitive of the boys, realized. Archie was referring to the kind of ghost hunting gear they use in the movies, and if they didn't have any clever devices that tracked the vibrations of electromagnetic waves, or whatever the otherworldly thing was, they could at least bring a cross and holy water. But Archie was too shy to say it out loud. He didn't want to show himself a coward, and Harry again understood that and kept silent. The boys were going to see and maybe even experience the thrill. Moreover, they were not afraid, because it was a sunny day and the forest was all around, in which they felt at home as country boys. They knew what kind of trees, bushes, herbs, distinguished poisonous mushrooms and berries, and the most unpleasant adventure so far for them was a meeting with an adder. And now Archie was leading them confidently down a narrow, not-so-subtle path. "She's crazy to live so far away," said Billy. "What if something happens? She drinks like I don't know who. If she dies, the wolves will find her before people do." "There's another road there." Archie turned around. "It's on the highway. It's longer if you walk, but then when you turn into the woods, it'll take you about 10 minutes to get to the hut. And I took you the way I took you. It won't be long now." The boys were quiet when they saw the hut. None of them had ever been here before. They had no idea that it had given a very different impression before. It had been in a clearing overgrown with flowers, and it had looked like a fairy tenement. Harvey was fond of carving and spent a lot of time making wooden lace. He also had some livestock, goats and chickens. The cabbages in the vegetable garden were filling up, and the tomatoes were turning red. Now the dilapidated house seemed abandoned if it weren't for the laundry drying on the rope. The broken glass was replaced by plastic sheeting. There was no trace of the vegetable garden, and the wooden laces were torn off or simply rotted. "Look, does she really live here?" Austin couldn't take it anymore. "Maybe somewhere else? You can't live here. So you see, it's even washed. Maybe this laundry's been hanging here for 3 years." Billy clawed at the edge of the decrepit gray sheet. "No, it's still wet, but I know what you mean, Austin. I'd howl worse than a ghost in a place like this." The boys touched the door in case the landlady didn't lock it, and they could see what was inside. But the door was locked. Then they tried to look through the windows. For this purpose, we used an old bench that stood by the porch. They carried it from window to window, stood on it one by one, and greedily gazed at the surviving panes. Inside, the same desolation reigned. In the largest room there was so much dirt or earth on the floor that something was even growing out of it. Food scraps and unwashed dishes, doors hanging on one hinge, a disassembled bed, the shelter of the most unassuming of bums, that's all. "I think that only ghosts in here are rats," Austin said thoughtfully. If Tony had been asleep at the time, and he'd long ago confused the time of day and night, he would have missed the boys' arrival, and they were the only ones he could remember visiting the place. But he was awake, and he heard their voices. Instantly, he realized that it was these children who had come here, and he distinguished exactly the children's voices without their mother's permission. Lucy would never have let them in here. And now he would have heard her shouting. She would have chased the intruders away, cursing them. So his mother wasn't home. Tommy listened for a few minutes, trying to believe he wasn't hallucinating, and then he grabbed the poker his mother had brought him to keep the rats away, and started hitting everything on the cellar wall, on some iron pot that had somehow ended up in the corner. He pounded the poker and shouted as loud as he could. Hey, 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 come here. The boys ran away. They didn't wonder who it was. They were frightened by the scream. They had entered a stranger's house without permission, and they feared the man as much as the ghost. That strange woman could have put anyone in her house, and they had better get away quickly. Tony had unknowingly guessed the feelings that swept over the boys. Don't be afraid. I'm alone here. I'm in trouble. I need help. They stopped quite far away and listened to his voice, which they heard already so faintly that they could not distinguish all the words. It sounded like it was calling for help, Billy said uncertainly. Yeah, it's just to catch us. Archie sniffed and said firmly, don't fall for it. It's a scam. Come on, let's go look. It was a chance for Billy to show he was braver than the others. Too bad we didn't bring a knife just in case, or at least a stick. He lashed out at Archie. What kind of mushroom hunter are you without a knife? At least a small one. Okay, guys, come on. If anything, we'll get out of there right away. The place where the prisoner languished, however, was first discovered by Austin. Looks like that's where he was yelling at us from, guys. Now they stood in the small crowd at the entrance to the basement. I'm here. Tony's voice came up again. The boys realized that the person calling them was down there somewhere and couldn't seem to get upstairs. Uncle, how are we going to get to your place? Shouted Harry. There's a locked door. The lock is hanging. Tony froze for a few seconds, unable to find something to say. No one ever came in here. His mother, however, remembered to lock the door when she was away. Too much was at stake. What happened to you, Uncle? Can you hear us? Harry called out. I'm sick. I can't go out on my own. Don't be afraid of me. Take a stone. Try to break the hinge, break the door, open. Yeah, and then you're gonna say we're trespassing. I'm not going to tell. Tony begged. Guys, let's hurry up, huh? Or she'll be back. He didn't bother to explain who. They understood it already. Tell you what, Billy decided. Let's give it a try. If that aunt complains, we'll say it happened. There's a lot of us that believe us. What is she? She's a drunk. We can't trust her. He looked around, picked up a heavier stone, and struck. It took a while. The boys were shifting. Harry's fingers shook off and he whimpered softly. In the end, the lock was knocked off by Archie. There were steps leading down there, and there was a light on. They cautiously descended one by one, ready to rush back down at the slightest danger. The boys had not seen much in their lives, but this sight shocked them. One look at this man of indeterminate age was enough to realize that he lived here. Mutilated hands and feet, hair below the shoulders, a beard that had grown for God knows how long, and an iron chain. For a few moments they could not say a word. These guys had not read Robinson Crusoe or the Count of Monte Cristo, but they realized that they had witnessed something monstrous. How long have you been sitting here? Billy asked, his voice sounding hoarse for some reason. He didn't know whether to address the man as you or you, but the man was so helpless that you came naturally. A long time ago, Tony shrugged helplessly. If he wanted to, he couldn't say how long he'd been imprisoned. Then it dawned on him, I was like you now when I was. Who? Now it came out in a whisper. The boys guessed. This middle-aged aunt, whom they had never thought of in any way, because she was spoken of in the village with nothing but squeamish pity, this aunt was capable of. Now they could not look at her without horror. She is, isn't she? Who is she to you? Asked Austin. Mother, listen guys, Tony tried to make sure that the guys, no matter how confused the feeling was, would remember what he was going to tell them. Do you know where my uncles live? There's a blue-roofed house by the church. If it's still blue, Tony's been down for a moment. Tell them I'm alive. Tell them to come get me. And if they don't want to, then find Barbara. Her mom works at the hospital. Her name's Catherine. She's the head nurse there. In his mind, Catherine was still very young, and Barbara was still a girl. It seemed to him that the world had frozen for the time he'd been sitting here. And the boys looked at Sasha. "That's my sister," he said. "Barbara, that is. And Catherine is my mother's name." Tony fixed his eyes on Sasha as if he were his own and continued talking, mostly to him. "If she doesn't believe you saw me give her this," he awkwardly rushed over to a stack of what the guys mistook for damp paper, started throwing it around. Involuntarily, everyone moved closer. They were paintings, but they were painted as if by an alien. It was clear that here was a forest, here was a river, and here was a meadow. Only the river was sometimes green, in the forest grew some fantastic trees, and in the meadow hopped unknown animals, a little resembling hares. Tony drew from memory, and with the colors he had. "I found this." Tony pointed to a sheet of paper with a picture of a girl about 10 years old. You could see how much the artist cared about the image. The paper was worn and stained in some places, but the drawing had been restored over and over again. Harry recognized his sister immediately. At home, there were pictures from that time in an album. "I knew her a little," Tony explained, "when I was in the hospital." "How is she now?" "She doesn't live with us now," Harry explained. "She's at school in the city, but she'll be here soon. She's getting married, and she wants to live with us for a while, because then she won't have to." It seemed to Harry that there were tears in the prisoner's eyes. "You tell her. Just tell her I'm alive, and then it's up to you." "Wait," Archie was afraid. "We'll leave now, and that your mother will come. She'll see that the door was broken. What's she gonna do to you?" Tony didn't know. He knew only that his mother would not allow her secret to be revealed. Barbara managed to follow the path her mother dreamed for her. She was the best student at school, well-read, responsible, and diligent. For the first time in several years, the village school had a gold medalist. Barbara was determined enough to apply to medical school right away, bypassing medical school. Even her mother didn't believe she could get in. The competition was too high, but Barbara got in. For the next few years she lived in a dormitory. Her parents suggested renting an apartment so that she could study in peace, but luckily the girls in the room were serious. Barbara sometimes thought they couldn't stand the strain of so much work. The lights were turned off at midnight. They got up at 5 in the morning. When the girl came home, she had no strength to communicate with her relatives. She slept off, got up only to eat, and again, like a zombie, wandered to bed. After a couple of years, however, Barbara became so involved that she started working part-time at the hospital in the evenings. Her friends discouraged her, telling her that her studies would be enough for now. It was the last opportunity to prolong her childhood. Soon they will all plunge into work with their heads. It is well known that very few doctors work on one rate, more and more on 1.5 and 2. But Barbara did not give in and increasingly stayed on night duty. She wanted to see if she had chosen the right profession. She wanted to learn the practical skills that young doctors lacked. And of course, the money she was earning was not superfluous either. Barbara had not forgotten Tony. She had been sad and worried about her friend for a long time after their meeting. And when she was told that Tony had gone to his relatives and was unlikely to return, she looked for a chance to get his address and to give him a letter. If he's learning to draw, maybe he'll adapt somehow and be able to write at least a short reply, she thought, or dictate to someone what he wants to say. A few times she even managed to trip Lucy up. "How's Tony?" she asked, walking up to the woman in the store. "Good," the boy's mother answered one-wordedly. "Here, please give this to him. You're visiting him, I suppose. Or send it to him." Barbara held out a piece of paper. In her message, at the bottom, she remembered to write her own address. "Okay," agreed Lucy. She stuffed the girl's letter into her pocket, only to toss it into the nearest trash can later. Barbara had never once dared to ask her about Tony, to ask for his address. Over the years, the memories of the boy had faded, but, returning her thoughts to her distant childhood, Barbara reminded herself of a scuba diver who had plunged to the maximum depth, and everything around her seemed unreal. The only thing left was a light sadness. Barbara hoped that Tony was doing well and had somehow adapted to life, and happiness smiled on him. Perhaps he could have called out to her from afar, but he didn't, and so she was a thing of the past for him. And then, already in her senior year at the Institute, during another night duty, Barbara met Max. He was a young doctor, desperately worried at heart about whether he could cope, so he put on an air of deliberate equanimity. Barbara immediately realized that Max was very talented. He lived medicine and talked about it with passion. and they felt trust in each other. Both were still on the threshold of science. Both had a lot to learn. They shared their doubts and were proud of small successes, encouraged each other in failures, and soon it became something vital for them to call each other in the evening and tell each other how the day went, to ask for advice, to remember something funny. In the summer, they went to the sea together, and Barbara returned so happy that her mother did not have the heart to reproach her daughter, for she had waited for Barbara for a long year and dreamed that she would spend all her vacations at home. But she had to accept the inevitable, and Barbara began her own life. The young people did not talk about the wedding. It was already as if it was a matter of course that they would stay together. It was only at the end of the following spring that Max said, "We should probably apply now. When you start working, we'll probably only meet at the hospital, and at night you'll be on duty, and I won't be able to get married there." And this time Barbara came home not just for fun, but to discuss with her parents what was going on. It was decided that the young people would get married in the city, and there they would organize an evening in a cafe, to which Barbara's parents would also come. And then, a few days later, they would set the table here in the village, so that all those who had known Barbara since childhood could come. If Barbara had a little sister, she would be interested in the bride's lush dress and jewelry, smell the perfume, and try on heeled shoes. But the girl had only a brother, and with a great difference in age, and all these girlish trinkets Harry did not care about. That's why Barbara was surprised when her brother called her in for an important talk. She'd had to take on the role of Sasha's advocate many times before, and to present his misdeeds to his parents in such a way that the punishment was not too severe. Right now, she thought her brother had done something wrong again. "Well," she asked, covering the door, "what now? Did you break a window? Or got into a fight? Varia, do you remember Tony?" Harry decided to be direct. Barbara flinched so violently that her brother realized the question had struck her, and the girl couldn't understand how Harry had gotten hold of this story. Her mother had forgotten everything a long time ago, and for her it was a sore subject, and she never remembered her friend, never said his name out loud. "Is there something you want to tell me about him?" Harry had never seen his sister so excited before. "I'll tell you everything, but don't swear. The boys and I went to catch a ghost like fools. And there he was, on a chain, you know." And Harry told the whole story. When it came to the cellar, Barbara cried like a dead man. She couldn't stop. Fearful, with swollen lips, she was no longer wiping away her tears, and she was sobbing. It was like she couldn't breathe. Harry realized he was going to kill her with this, but he couldn't hide it. He pulled the folded drawing out of his pocket, unfolded it, and placed it in her lap. When Barbara saw it and realized that it was her, that Tony had drawn it, she threw back her head and squeezed her eyes shut as if in unbearable agony. "Harry, I'm trashy." Her voice was just a little audible. "I got over it so quickly and stopped looking for him. If I was looking for him, Speaking, she could no longer speak. Harry touched her arm. "Varia, the guys and I agreed to tell you first, because you two seem to know each other. What should we do next? We should probably tell the police to go there." He waited for her to answer, but it took her a moment longer to gain control of her voice. "I'll go over there. You don't know where it is, and that woman is a freak. I've never been afraid of her, but now, I'm afraid of her." Barbara's never spoken to her brother like this before, as an equal, forgetting she's older. "I'm afraid Lucy will do something too. She won't be afraid of me, but if the police, I don't know what she might do. She's already in the middle of it. She saw we were there. The door's broken. So should we go now?" Barbara was ready for that too. "If we go alone without Archie, I'll be fine in the light if I can find my way. It's early in the morning. Let's do it at 4 o'clock. I'll wake you up. But we can't get him out of there with just the two of us. You think Aunt Lubia won't wake up when we drag him out of there? You want to fight her or something? I'll go with the phone. If anything happens, I'll call the cops from there. Harry, don't you understand? He's got his life hanging in the balance." And Harry only had to wave his hand and say, "You're thinking nonsense, sister, but so be it." When she returned from the village and saw the cellar door open, Lucy was numb. She thought that sooner or later someone would come here, at least some lost hikers or mushroomers. And it might happen that she'd be talking to them and Tony would raise his voice. Or, even more frighteningly, someone would start seriously inquiring about his fate. Not the villagers, of course, but someone from the authorities. But she hadn't expected her secret to come out like this. She didn't need to guess who was here, because Tony could tell her everything. She tossed the bags, which had seemed so heavy a moment ago, but now, on adrenaline, were like fluff. And without thinking about the possibility of slipping on the steps, she rushed downstairs. "Who came to see you?" Lucy didn't recognize her own voice. Tony shrugged, hiding his fear quite successfully. "Some guys. I don't know how I know them. I don't know what they wanted. They were stupid. Maybe they were looking for treasure." If Lucy had not been in such a state, she would have laughed a horde in her kind of house. "What did you tell them?" "That it's hot outside and it's cool in here. So I came down here to paint. They didn't see my chain, I was sitting on it, and I covered it with a blanket." Tony had thought about that legend in the time his mother had been away. It was a good thing the boys had told him it was a hot summer up there. But Lucy couldn't believe him. There was too much at stake. It was like she was looking at the basement through someone else's eyes. There was too much to tell that Tony hadn't just come down here for a while, that he lived here. A mattress with a flat, dirty pillow and a rag instead of a blanket, a night pot, leftover food, and the guy himself, overgrown like a hermit. Even if the guys didn't see his chain, in any case, they'd spread the word that Lucy had some crazy person living at her place, hiding from people. And there's no telling what's gonna happen. The woman hadn't thought so fast in a long time. She climbed up without a word to her son, and Tony could only wonder what would happen next. The mother went back in fast enough. "You're coming with me now," she tossed to Tony. He staggered back. "How's that?" "I'll take the chain off now. And then I'll make you crawl or crawl. It's up to you, just hurry up." Tony was so confused that he didn't think straight for the first few minutes. When he got out of the basement, he had the feeling of being on another planet. He had forgotten the world completely, and though his legs could walk, he just couldn't walk. His mother poked him in the shoulder. "Come on. Where do you want me to go?" Tommy hadn't noticed that his mother was drunk, but he knew that in fact her mind had long since gone. That way, the mother pointed to the woods. She had the sense to realize that Tony couldn't walk very far, and she couldn't drag him, but it was absolutely necessary to hide him, at least for a while. And then we'd have to see how things went. Maybe it would be possible to go back to her old life, but not now. The two of them made their way to an inconspicuous spot in the woods where his father's old hunting tent stood. "You can sit here for a while," your mother said. And at once, as if with a knife cutting off all hope of escape, of release, of his being able to call for help, she threw coldly. "If anyone comes looking for you, I'll shoot them. I don't just have a 10, I still have my father's gun." "What are you going to do?" Even Tony, who knew his mother best, couldn't believe she was capable of that. "What did you think? If they find out about you, I'm going to jail. And I don't want to go to jail. So we'll settle everything here, with you and with me. Don't you dare call anyone." She made one last threatening remark. Tony lay in the tent for the rest of the day. He was not well. If his mother had given him such a gift earlier, she would have let him out, even for a little while. With what delight he would have looked at every blade of grass, remembered the flowers, inhaled the slightly perceptible odor that remained in the tent, that reminded him of home and of his father. But now he was trapped. He wouldn't get far. His legs were crippled too. So when the danger to his mother was over, she would put him back in the cellar, and that would be that. We could go all the way. From here he could hear if someone came to his house, started talking to his mother. His hearing's gotten very thin. He could yell at the top of his voice, make himself known. His mother might decide to take up a gun, and even if she did, it was not certain that it would hit. But if she shot someone because of him, how would he forgive himself later? And his mother was apparently so excited that she didn't think to bring him any food or water. Tony didn't sing songs with the wolves that night, though if he could have, he would have lured them to him as easy prey, so down he was. The only thing he decided to himself was that he would not return to the cellar. Better here to starve than there in the dreary and stinking half-darkness. He wouldn't go, that's all. Even if his mother dragged him, he would cling to every root, every branch that came out of the ground. Dawn was approaching. The thought of taking Rocky's old dog with him occurred to Harry at the last minute. Barbara objected sharply. "Why, he's a fool, not even a hunting dog. They'll bark at the most inopportune moment. If Lucy doesn't have dogs of her own, she'll figure it out in no time." "Rocky is smart." Harry rubbed the dog's backside. I'm not very clear with the road. Rocky will lead him back in case of anything, like a shoelace." Barbara only flashed her eyes in his direction, trying to control herself. She was terribly nervous, but there was no need to delay. It was beginning to get light already. You could probably see all the trunks of the forest clearly. And like the last time, Harry wasn't afraid at all until he and Barbara reached the fort, where one path led to the highway and the other to Lucy's hut. Rocky trotted quietly ahead, sniffing the ground. Not once did she bark or whine. Harry put his finger to his lips. "Now if we speak, it should be in a whisper," he said to his sister. "She can hear us from here." He wanted to ask his sister what she thought she would do if Lucy fixed the door and they couldn't get down to the basement silently. His only hope was that Barbara would see for herself that Tony couldn't be reached silently. They would go back and raise the alarm. Harry pulled out the crumpled drawing again, and Barbara hadn't noticed he'd taken it with him. "Look for it, Rocky." He shoved the sheet toward the dog's muzzle. At home, Rocky once found slippers, which are lost somewhere in the corner under the bed. But here, poking her nose in the drawing, she whimpered a little audibly, as if realizing that the louder you can nod and turn somewhere in the grass. "Stupid dog." Now Harry was angry too. "Where are you pulling?" "We're over there, okay." They'd already gone far away, and Rocky stood there, looking away, not understanding what these people wanted. "You said to look for them." "Here is the clearing where the hut stands. It is quite dawn now, but the mistress is probably still asleep. She has no cattle that would be hungry early, and if Lucy had a good meal last night, God knows when she will wake up." Nevertheless, Harry held Barbara back. "Stay away from the house. Let's get out of here. You see, you can see everything from the windows. If Lucy looks, she'll see it right away. You see the barn over there, as if it were on a hill. There's the entrance. From that side, you can't see it from here. I'll go see if the door's open. Maybe she's tied it up with some rope. If we can't go downstairs, I'll at least whisper to Tony that we'll get him out soon." Harry couldn't hold his sister back. Barbara crept toward the house, ducking as if that would help her. The boy bit down on his fist as the girl disappeared around the corner. Barbara stood in front of the dark entrance to the basement. The door was still hanging on one hinge. She could go down, but something told Barbara that Tony wasn't here. It was like calling out to the darkness, and the void answered. She had to change the whole plan on the fly. What to do now? She instinctively turned around. Lucy was standing on the porch with a shotgun. They recognized each other instantly. Lucy knew whose daughter she was, but she didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. If Harry had rushed to his sister, Lucy would have taken him down with the second shot. She had a double-barreled shotgun, but he dashed into the woods before the mistress could see him. His hands were shaking as he pushed the buttons on the phone. He'd never called the emergency services before. Call what? An ambulance? Police? 911? He didn't remember afterward which option he'd chosen, which buttons he pressed. The Tonys didn't want to let Barbara in. First of all, she was in a different ward. He's in trauma, she's in surgery. And who else would help him get from one building to the other? Secondly, Tony was taken to the hospital to be examined, treated for a while, and to determine his fate. Barbara's life was in doubt for a few days. Catherine could never forget how the young, impressionable surgeon came out of the operating room pale, with tears in his eyes. He did not ask who those people were waiting for him in the corridor, who they were to the girl. The operation was still in progress, but they let him go, realizing that he might collapse. "That's the kind of hole in the chest," he said, as if to himself, and waved his hand, in fact, already Trump. Barbara was in intensive care for a week, and then only her mother was allowed to visit her in the ward, and only for a short time. When the girl was allowed to visit, she couldn't believe her eyes. The door opened awkwardly, and Tony appeared on the threshold in a wheelchair. They hadn't seen each other in so many years, and yet he was the same, only grown up. Barbara could at most awkwardly raise herself awkwardly on the bed toward him. They embraced, and for a long time they couldn't unclasp their hands, like two soldiers surviving a battle. "You never found it?" the first thing Barbara asked. Tony immediately realized it was about Lucy and shook his head. "Who knows where she's gone? Mother knows the forest well. If she shows up in the surrounding villages, people will turn her in. Everyone already knows." He stroked her hair as gently and awkwardly as if his hand were a bear's paw. "You're gonna get better, aren't you?" Barbara nodded. "I'm sorry, I'm really stupid. I should have done what Harry said, and I decided on my own. You've all been worried sick." The door opened without knocking and Max walked in. Barbara wanted to say something, but seeing that she had a guest, Max disappeared down the hall. "Tony, you won't go back there again, will you?" Barbara asked excitedly. Now she was holding her friend by both hands. "I'm not even talking about the forest. I'm talking about the village. You can't go there. One thing is that your mother goes there anyway. Second, you've seen so few good things in life that you can't go to people who don't care if you're there or not. Just curiosity. Remember when they called you Mobley? You'll live with us, right?" Tony saw the looks that Barbara and Max exchanged. It was a moment, but it was enough for him. Except that Barbara couldn't be upset right now. "Look over there," he said. And he smiled at her, and his eyes were dry. There was only one home for the disabled in the whole neighborhood, and that was lucky, because not every neighborhood had one. Tony thought the conditions here were heavenly. He lived in a room for two, with an elderly uncle, also a wheelchair user, as a neighbor. Quiet sometimes, wouldn't say a word all day. But that's what Tony needed. He was used to talking too much. But his bed was by the window, and you could look out as much as you wanted from the second floor, and from the second floor you had a view of the yard, and of the road that was just beyond the fence, and of the village that lay in the distance. And under the window there was a rowan tree. Now, in winter, its branches were covered with snow, and there were no more berries left, and the birds had pecked them all up. So Tony hung up a feeder, and several times a day he climbed heavily onto the windowsill, opened the window and fed the birds. And here you didn't have to wait for food to be brought to you, as Tony's neighbor did, but you could go to the dining room 3 times a day. And there was a library here, and since Tony had been in the paper and had gotten fame, which he didn't want, they gave him paints and paper and made sure he never ran out. In the library his drawings were already hanging on the walls, and the head promised to organize Tony's exhibition in the House of Culture. Well, that was up to Burr. The former prisoner's world was overflowing with impressions. Sometimes it seemed more than enough. He even wanted to be in silence. And when his neighbor's children came to visit him, who had put him here, Tony would go to the farthest corner of the corridor, which the patients didn't like. The air was blowing mercilessly here, and in winter the sofa by the window was always empty. Tony didn't even notice that it was cold in here. He was used to everything in his basement. For the first time since his childhood he had a Christmas tree, and he had never seen such a tree before. It was under the ceiling, all decorated with toys and chains, all lit up. They called him to help decorate it, but he only shook his head, afraid of breaking a single fragile toy with his awkward hands. And on the last day of December, he came to the hall where the Christmas tree was in the morning, when the other patients were still asleep. It was the most grand room they had here. Yellow carpet on the floor, airy curtains, several soft sofas, a piano. Sometimes school children came to the House of Invalids with a concert, singing, reciting poetry. And yesterday Barbara sent him a New Year's greeting. She recorded a video. She and Max decided to celebrate New Year's Eve in Prague, and they stood on a very beautiful old square. It was dark, but all the lights were on. Young people so cheerful, beautiful, and Barbara was laughing at him and waving her hand and was so happy. And there were children frolicking around, some in carnival costumes, some just like that. Tony thought of the children and suddenly noticed a little girl in the corner, as if summoned by his thoughts. She was sitting in her wheelchair, looking at the Christmas tree carefully and seriously. "What are you doing here?" he asked, as softly and affectionately as he could. "I'm making up a fairy tale," said the girl. "What else is there to do?" "I'm making up something magical." "And you tell me, and I'll draw a picture to your tale," he offered. "Tony, I won't laugh. Just no way." She looked at him, incredulous at first, and then her gaze softened. "You really won't? Well, okay then." And so ended December, and a new year was on the doorstep. Beautiful Denver, stately and red brick. The Sherlovsky staircase descends from its foot to the Missouri riverfront, pedestrianized Broadway Street. Among the old buildings rambles a modestly dressed young woman. Old jeans, unremarkable sweatshirt, not flashy sneakers, gathered in a ponytail, bright red hair, clearly long ago has not known professional styling, from under thick stockings on the surrounding world. Occasional glances of green eyes with golden dots on the pupils. Stunningly beautiful, but somehow joyless. She is irresistibly good, looking like some ancient Greek backhand, created to drink wine and make merry. A jeweler would say, like an emerald skillfully framed by the fiery luster of gold, but hiding its charms for a while. But she does not want to drink wine and praise Dionysus. She wants the peace of silence, the freedom. Behind her back, the gates of the women's colony on the Orchard Street lands in Nizhny Novgorod closed 2 hours ago. There's still 3 hours of time before the train home south. Why not see a city she had seen only a few times and from afar? Yes, heard its noise as she traveled from institution to institution. At the beginning of a long pedestrian boulevard with a mass of funny sculptures, the redhead stops by a souvenir store to buy the famous Gorodets gingerbread for souvenirs. Though who was going to take a present? She has no intention to meet her mother after her betrayal. And she has no one else in this world. Somehow unexpectedly, quickly under sad thoughts, a pretty street with artists, a crowd of inquisitive tourists, a collection of stores, almost ends near the transition to the Kremlin complex. A woman peeks into a butcher store with local specialties. Mother of God, I was leaving to get away from the world of total deficit, and here the counters are bursting with abundance. The stranger is talking to herself. Greedily buys an appetizing ring, glossy smoked sausage, a fresh loaf, unable to resist adding a jar of instant coffee, a packet of her favorite oatmeal cookies to her stockpile of provisions, adds a little to the tasty trophy, a flat bottle of cognac. She had something to celebrate tonight, though she was indifferent to booze. There would have to be something to enjoy on the train. More than 24 hours, she continued her mental monologue. Get used to the realities of free life, new conditions, the clean air of loneliness, when everything around you ceases to be common. A dormitory barrack with bunks, rows of showers in the bath, basins for washing laundry, a workshop for sewing men's underwear, a la family. The woman smiled, remembering that her name Lucy is translated as laundry basin. Goes for a walk around the territory of the Kremlin, takes a long look at the exposition of military equipment at the entrance, stomps leisurely along the alleys for love with bright berries from ripe rowan berries. Golden autumn. It rules its colorful costume ball. The foliage of all shades of yellow, green, and Bordeaux is still pretty firmly on the trees and shrubs, but the Missouri is frowning its autumnal frown, rolling gluey gray waters, bringing boats up and down. There's even 2 luxury cruise ships moored there. You can't see the names from afar, but for some reason Lucy is firmly convinced that the ships are cruise ships. At the Zone, they recently showed them a movie in honor of the holiday of some townsperson and the arrival of the commission, Titanic. There was a rich crowd walking the decks. They ate their food in the restaurant, shining in the light of artificial lamps with snow-white dishes, demonstrated to each other expensive outfits, jewelry, aristocratic gloss, everything on display, everything in the highest order. Maybe that's why God drowned this uncaring bunch in the icy seawater. That's how the poor seem to love America, promising everyone the fulfillment of their most cherished dreams. Where does justice lie in this world? You'd be hard-pressed to find it. Lucy used to spend a lot of time in the Zone reading books. The library was noble. She chose novels of English and French classics, not badly studied the works of writers, dramas, thrillers, tragedies. I didn't complain. I had more than enough of my own misfortune. Plunge briefly into someone else's tales became easier. Longing behind the glitter of book tinsel hid. I was naive or dreamy. She saw herself in the future also the author of sentimental novels, love lyrics. How many women's fates passed her by in the Zone? How many stories for a lifetime cannot tell on paper, and the words will not pick up the right? But where literary craft is taught, she did not know. No, she wasn't an illiterate ignoramus. She had finished school without a C before she went to jail, but then everything went wrong. The woman was distracted from not cheerful thoughts by an ugly scene. A noisy flock of young people fell out of the bus. The group was either going on a tour of the city or had already returned from it. One healthy, handsome guy was dragged out of the bus, almost in his arms. At first, she even thought that he was ill, where there was a good-looking, obviously richly dressed major was drunk, and the comrades did not know what could be effectively done about it. Not finding a more productive solution, they laid the guy on a bench next to Lucy sitting on it. Don't even think of interfering, ordered the ex-convict to herself. Isn't that all you need, trouble? I hadn't gotten home yet. And my heart ached and ached for the stupid, inexperienced boy. About 20 meters away from this bench sat 2 elderly people who looked like independent tourists, exploring Denver meticulously, with feeling, with purpose. They were heatedly discussing their impressions of the architectural beauties in the nearby streets. The woman carefully handed her companion a bottle of water and a piece of candy bar. just broken off a bar in a rustling package, probably husband and wife. It's obvious that they've understood each other half-heartedly for a long time. They wouldn't be chased away. Beware, Lucy thought, but her tongue was already working ahead of her. The boy's not well. She ran up to the resting couple. Could you call an ambulance? And yourself, why did not you dare? The old man smiled slyly. Maybe the youth and without us will cope, and then we have to deal with a false call. We are not from around here. I'm not from here either, Lucy explained. I have a train in an hour, and I was just about to catch a cab to go to the train station. Altogether, they turned to the bench, on which the guys had laid the poor man, who knew no measure in his outpourings. The victim was restless, waving his arms. He kept falling off the bed. The guy was already so bad that the guys moved him to the ground, putting down their jackets. They themselves were shivering, squirming in the far from timid autumn chill. "You've got it, you restless young lady," said an elderly tourist pressed the screen of the phone. With a clear voice, he began to explain to the dispatcher on the other end of the wire where he was and what had happened, and Lucy belatedly thought about the fact that she had not yet realized to get a connection. Yes, and the device of cellular communication knew were completely unknown to her. "You'll have to learn everything on the outside again." She knocked out her attitude while she ran to catch a cab, but she was gestured down by a man helping with the ambulance. "Don't leave me and my wife behind. If you witness what happened, I'll call you a cab to the station." It's come to this, Lucy laughed unkindly to herself. 3 hours out of the zone, and already managed to sign up as a witness. There's nothing to do. I made this mess and I'll have to clean it up. I've got a meticulous nature. I can never get past it. If something's wrong. The ambulance arrived surprisingly quickly, and thank God. By that time, the unlucky Alki had already lost consciousness from intoxication. Doctors had to carry out resuscitation right on the bench, and then to Lucy and her elderly helpers approached both the police and medical rescue workers. "You called us quickly. Well done. We suspect the boy has an individual intolerance. First time he tasted vodka, he had a seizure, could have gotten quinsy edema. We got there in time. His life is in no danger now." Even a cab, called by a comrade in the Salvation Army, did not save Lucy from the fact that in the train, in her carriage, she sat almost on the run. The conductor was a pest. She studied the certificate of release like some ancient scientific treatise in an unknown language. She hummed unhappily, saying that there were not enough convicts in the car, but she nodded her head graciously for a place in the passenger car. Lucy rode alone on the two side shelves. At the bottom, like a queen, she drank 100 grams straight from the neck for a sweet sleep. She snacked happily on a smoked sausage sandwich. And then I brought myself some boiling water, borrowed a faceted glass cup holder from the conductor, generously poured into it divinely smelling coffee and meat granules. I bought Tristicas with sugar, tore open a packet of cookies. Divine, impossible, fabulous. Thought Lucy was falling through the clatter of the wagon wheels, even after a hefty dose of coffee, into a graceful slumber. Her fate had been steep until now. What would the coming day hold in store for her? That sweet word, freedom. Thought Lucy woke up in the morning in a train car. That seemed to be the name of an old detective movie made in the 70s by either the Baltics or Chicagoans with the Baltics. Some escaped prisoners, some chases and pursuits. It's strange, I remember the movie vaguely, but the winged phrase from it popped up at once. It's all she long-awaited freedom so influences me. The period of agonizing for me the decisions of the administration is alkanayotsia. They'll release me on parole, detain me, remind me of all my sins. A young woman rolled such a pleasant word freedom in her mouth. She enjoyed it, this imaginary triumph, expressed by leaving the territory of the colony. A holiday, a new experience, a revelation. Who's gonna be a panka behind barbed wire? It's funny. It's a good thing I'm going home to New York, not lurking, having every right to do so. My 8 years in the penitentiary is like a bad dream, like hell and hard labor. She saw this picture much later, and she was born earlier. Little Lucy was born in 1995. Parents lost their jobs, survived by casual earnings, quarreled among themselves almost to the fight, and then sweetly reconciled. Here at the conclusion of such another piece, she appeared in the womb in the project, not in time, oh how not in time. After realizing that knocked up, her mother was angry at the world, shouted at her husband Dold, who did not like to protect himself, blamed herself for lack of restraint in dangerous days. What was the use? Pregnancy was rarely easy and carefree. Only the belly after the 5th month began to round up. Otherwise, no toxicosis, no health problems. My father was offered a job on a rotational basis in the northern latitudes. Easygoing Joe packed a backpack. He was the only one in sight. Always irritated, blushing, fat wife, he had long pissed him off. And now he had an excuse. He settled down in the north like a native. He enjoyed the abundance of fluffy white snow, invigorating frost, wooden log cabins right in the middle of the harsh Tego with a rudimentary set of amenities. He had a strange feeling of a caveman who had been kept in captivity until now and then released into the open. In his small homeland of seaside New York, he had never seen such winter riches. He prayed for male physical work and logging, which paid well by the standards of the 90s. He quickly found himself a fighting, hardy girlfriend for lovemaking. He was a prominent man, even among the same sometimes handsome stout men, distinguished by his breed, article, and grace. A telegram with the text, "Do not wait for me, I will not return. Here now is my home and my happiness." Knocked his wife in 6 months, and then disappeared from the horizon of his wife, and already born by then Lucy. The divorce was formalized in absentia. He made it clear that the alimony is not worth counting on, as well as to complain to the authorities and search for him useless. It would be worse if his first family went to the wrong place. Another woman might have gone to bat for her rights and get her spouse back. Lucy's mother went to the other extreme, began to change suitors like loves, all in an attempt to prove to herself and her ex-husband that she's not a slackard either. She's in demand with the male sex. The girl grew up as a tumbleweed, from staying in kindergarten from Monday to Friday in the school after-school program. Her mother was looking for her ex-husband's features and the girl's green eyes. Joe's hair was a light red head, but this one was painted like shining copper. Her figure was feminine beyond her years, as if she had not been born as a little scamp, but Aphrodite had come out of the foam of the sea. Lucy's mother compared herself and the growing little girl to the mirror. She didn't like what she saw. Therefore, in the rare hours when her daughter was at home and not in another children's institution, spanked her for no reason. It would have continued to continue and further, but the absent-minded mother fell in love. Yes, so that the light around without a hearty friend now did not see, there is no it near does not breathe. He does not sleep lazily on the sofa, at the window freezes in anticipation. At that time Lucy was 14 years old. The girl had blossomed, so you could paint pictures of her. And her mother is more and more anxious to get her out of sight and out of mind, so that the new boyfriend won't be interested in the young one. It didn't work. When the beau saw Lucy for the first time, he froze in admiration, but he was not a fool to show his interest in an underage girl. A young beauty walks across the room with an apple or a book. He'd be blown away with desire. She's just a snotty little thing. It's not far from trouble. He chose a cunning and secret tactic to win the girl. Books with her began to discuss, which also read and continue to study in large quantities, in chemistry and physics pulled up. Lucy was more and more attracted to literature and history. I took her to the movies and ice cream cafes while my common-law wife was on shift. Lucy's mother had been working as a conductor on intercity trains for 3 years already. He did not give himself away with a look, gestures, or a touch. On the contrary, kept somewhat aloof, like a cunning fox in ambush, knowing that his patience will reward him. For Lucy's 15th birthday, he gave her a small bottle of real French perfume and a new dress. "We have to pamper our daughter, we're family." He explained his generous impulse to his life partner. At times it began to seem to him that the hunt for the attention of even more beautiful young lady became for him a game, the purpose of life. If Lucy knew what thoughts and desires caused by her appearance, warm smile in the head of her stepfather, she would have fled from home without looking back. But the girl was naively unconcerned about anything, was childishly in love with a classmate who sat with her at the same desk, reveled in the works of Alexander Dumas, Swade Dreiser. She was a little out of this world. Her peers ran to the school wasteland to smoke. They pass a bottle of wine around, and then they play the bottle game. She'd take out another classic masterpiece from her backpack and disappear into dreams and reveries about a prince. Her mother did not spoil her with fashionable things in her closet and did not let her near her cosmetics. Lucy dressed gray and dull. Only bright appearance did not allow her to become a laughingstock. Good-natured, easygoing character. It's the 21st century. All around only talk about cell phones, their gadgets dream of getting from their parents. Lucy had no idea about the existence of technology, which can be controlled by pressing fingers. She was donning a button version of Nokia with a minimal set of functions, believing that this miracle, forgotten to the rich passengers in her mother's car, was the last masterpiece of electronic technology. There are so many other interesting things around in her beloved sunny New York City. The blue early warming still in spring and the long defending sea of fall velvet dunes, the gentle sand hugging Charlotte, the village suburb of the children's resort where their little private house stood, cherry trees in the garden in early summer with large maroon fruits, yellow-orange apricots in July, red-green juicy apples in September. In all these southern luxuries, the girl in the summer beach season helped her mother to trade. For the vegetable garden, both of them had neither strength, nor desire, nor time. So a couple of beds of greens for their table, fruit-bearing trees, curtsies with a plow did not require. Perfectly helped with an extra cent in the family budget. Fruit merchants did not go to the market. They gave their crops to resellers and let them do what they wanted with them. Lucy clutched her eyes sweetly. She realized she was hungry like a wolf. No, like a wolf that hadn't been fed in a long time. The rest of the sausage and loaf were devoured in 5 minutes. Then she had coffee and cookies. A couple of them she gave to a quick boy who was always spinning in the aisle of the carriage. She thought, look how his mother is fiddling with him. She took out a drawing set and handed him a big white pear, and then she smoothed his hair on his curly head. Why was everything wrong with my childhood? What did I deserve such indifference of my own mother? The girl's stepfather, by the way, was absolutely indifferent to all girls and girls falling into his eyes. Only Lucy awakened in him instincts and desire to be a pioneer to teach her everything. At 16, he still hadn't touched her, having paid for a birthday trip to VGS with the class that her parents had been offered at school. Before her senior year, Lucy came back from the trip so enthusiastic. Palaces, temples, sculptures, bridges, bodies of water, park landscape masterpieces. A new and more tangible dream was born in her pretty head. She should connect her destiny with the literary field, to be close to such marvelous art as the whole of North Palmyra. After digging through online academic directories, she chose a literary institute in Chicago. In Vegas, alas, there was no specialized university in the chosen profession. In the study in the 11th grade, plunged headlong. Stepfather in every possible way gave in to her in all endeavors, even convinced her mother. Let's send Lucy to the capital to study. My aunt lives there. She's a lonely woman. She'll take her in for the first time, then we'll see. We can't afford the commercial department, but the budget let her dare, if she gets the right number of points. The girl's mother didn't object. She was concerned about the presence in the house suddenly very mature daughter. It was already obvious that the fruit of their love affair with the cheating Joe had turned out to be fire. All right, slender figure, long slender legs, a thick wave of auburn red hair down to her waist. If you let it loose, the blush all over her cheeks, the emerald green of her lustrous and lively eyes. A lady of perfection. There's no other way to call such a work of Mother Nature. Behind the boys with silly giggles does not run. Next to almost indifferently sits with textbooks from morning to night, missing all the youth parties in the village. Oh, how many young people with a claim to cavaliers. Circles around their little house slice silent Lucy heart. Nobody liked from the word at all. A gift, not a child. No worries for her mother, White Crow, and a flock of peers not spoiled, almost Turgenev-skaya young lady, romantic, sentimental, kind, soulful, dreaming of pure, real, necessarily mutual love. So far, a suitable object in the immediate environment is not outlined. She will, as she sometimes joked, to study, study, and study. Mother did not realize that she had a very well-read, enlightened child. There was no time to dig into it and figure it out. How her daughter will live in Chicago, the mother did not think at all. I wish I could get this rival out of her husband's sight as soon as possible. Life will be easier. Life will be more fun. Stepfather still enthusiastically delved into all the literary experiments. Stepdaughter, devouring her eyes and more frankly, a couple of times unintentionally in an argument, put his hand on her knee. When he saw the astonishment in her gaze, he immediately retreated cowardly. Lucy, though she was nothing like her classmates, she didn't live on the moon. Something in her second daddy's gaze now began to seem viciously criminal, but she tried to dismiss such thoughts. There was not much time left before the final test of those notorious US, turning the exams upside down. How many points will I be able to score? Lucy was thinking about one thing. She didn't care about her stepfather's stares. Maybe it was all just my imagination. The circumstances of admission to the capital's university were most favorable. The number of points received after passing the U.S. was solid, and stepfather's aunt turned out to be the widow of a former official from the top. With the right connections, intelligent old lady met Lucy as a native person. Educated, intelligent, wise woman told the girl how to behave in the admissions committee. What other documents to add to create the image of a suitable applicant for this institute. In parallel with the admission, Lucy avidly familiarized herself with Chicago, the Field Museum with all its beauties and grounds, a trip to the Millennium Park, walking on the Crown Fountain, 2 trips with her aunt to the famous Metropolitan Theaters. There wasn't enough time for more, alas. I saw my name on the list of the lucky students admitted to the first course. She chose the specialty of literary worker, translator of fiction. She really wanted to learn several foreign languages as well. She didn't go home, but flew on the wings of victory. New York met her with the summer heat of summer vacationers idly walking around the village, the smells of ripe watermelons and melons, a quick bite to eat. Mother was on a trip, and stepfather at work rushed to the sea. Long walked on the soft sand shallow water. Then she threw herself into the aquamarine water with puppyish delight. She wanted to shout to the sky and the seagulls flying above her. I got an hurrah! I'm going to Chicago soon to study. I begin a new and necessarily successful and happy life. I came home all salty. My feet in the sand didn't even begin to dry. I wanted so badly to share the news with people close to me. With a joyful squeal, I rushed under the shower, washing off the traces of the sea presence and invasive omnipresent sand. I was so busy with my sensations that I didn't hear that the bathroom door opened silently, and my stepfather came in. Hearing his words and realizing his intentions, Lucy began to resist. Let me go. Are you crazy? What's the matter with you? Get out of here right now. The man didn't listen to her. After a few seconds, Lucy quieted down. Her stepfather took her reaction as a sign of agreement. The girl, meanwhile, frantically searched for a way out of this nasty situation. Also, Mom is on a voyage. What would happen now? Lucy all twitched with revulsion. The stepfather she trusted so much had just betrayed her in the nastiest way imaginable. The girl's eyes searched the room around her, and then she saw the shaving machine her stepfather used lying on the edge of the sink. A haze in her eyes, a state of affect, hopelessness. Lucy grabbed the razor and started stabbing him randomly with it. The cuts on her stepfather's face. The wild panther, the lynx, the ravenous cougar awoke in her. Taking advantage of her stepfather's confusion, jumped out of the old cast iron bathtub. Running into the room, the man, distraught with pain and frustration, rushed after her. The girl thrashed around the living room until she saw a massive crystal vase. She hadn't meant for him to die. It had all come out by accident. Throwing the glass stampede at her pursuer, she didn't calculate the force of the blow. There was so much hate in her right now, like some corny crime movie, flashing through her mind in a hot delirium. Her stepfather swung his arms in some ridiculous way, slipping in the puddle left by a wet Lucy. For a couple more seconds, as if in slow motion, he ran forward, and then a vase thrown by the girl appeared in his path. The blow landed on his forehead and temple. Lucy, sobbing, jumped up to the father lying on the floor. Again, she grabbed the fallen vase and delivered several more blows to the man's head. Later, the investigator said she had not committed an act of self-defense. She didn't have the strength to defend herself or prove anything for a long time. Then, after what happened, Lucy sat on the floor next to the body and howled. Then she went to the city phone, dialed the number of the police, and said deeply, "Come here, stepfather's dead." At the trial, her mother testified against her. She was always hovering in front of my husband. He couldn't have made a move on her by himself. She just provoked him with her defiant behavior. There's only one man in this world who loved me properly, and that one was killed by my dear little daughter. I don't want to know you anymore. Dan you. It didn't take long to solve Lucy's case. Her victim's head was a mess, not a scratch on her own. No help from the neighbors' stories about her being a well-behaved girl. Unflattering character references from school. The young criminal was given 10 years in a general security colony. She did not appeal to the higher courts. While the trial was going on, the documents were awaiting finalization. She turned 18. Now she couldn't even be a juvenile. The place of incarceration was Denver Women's Correctional Facility 2. After 8 years of exemplary work and behavior, Lucy was allowed to be released on parole. Now Lucy went to her hometown, not knowing what awaits there. Her mother during her time in prison never once came with her for a visit, did not transfer a single parcel to the zone. Only after her arrest, she brought her things to the detention center and disappeared. All these gloomy, hard years had passed. It was getting dusk outside the train window. Lucy again desperately wanted to eat. Here and a long stay in Miami came up. On the platform in a clean grocery kiosk, the girl bought 2 appetizing chebureks and 2 tender, still warm cocker puree with cheese. Coffee would do as a drink. She now had to save her earnings. Rent an apartment, settle down at the resort, get her passport again, try to find a job. On the sandy shore of New York, in the heart of the beach areas of Charla Village, sat a young man. He thought about the fact that soon the famous dunes would be completely lost from the barbaric raids of hoteliers, would disappear from the face of the earth. This was his way of distracting himself from his misgivings. He did not admit to himself that his heart was uneasy. For hours now, since last night, his twin brother hadn't returned his calls. Since childhood, he and Harvey had been evenly matched. Impressive height, well over 180 centimeters. The appearance of a tough warrior with a well-developed torso and musculature. Brown eyes with a twinkle, thick, luxuriant hair that any young lady would envy. Why did God view his different views on the world around us as a mockery? Once again, Tony asked himself. He himself is the soul of the company, the leader, the gray cardinal of the fate of peers. Waving the finger, any beauty will go with him in the palace, and in a hut under the bright southern stars. We'll be honored to accompany him at parties. Parties as a queen with an invisible crown of the chosen one, will sit in his black SUV and proudly gawk at the sides. Harvey is his brother, a half-brother, and from the same egg hatched as their mother likes to tease their mother, a bookworm, a fan of the computer, all these programs of technical coding inconceivable on the female sex, zero attention. Once fell in love in school in the neighbor's house, followed her like an idiot, tied with a rope to the leg of the diva, and then her parents moved to Chicago. Priless Nitsa disappeared forever, cutting off all past ties with the provincial Black Sea resort. Harvey, meanwhile, was still gone, never showed up at home. Offline. The man shook the sand off his jeans, went to the car parked in one of Charlotte's driveways to the sea. I'm going to stop by Harvey's apartment again and head to New York. There's a club thing tonight. I should at least take a shower and change. Taking the car off the alarm, once again looked around the neighborhood, saying to myself, it's good as it is now, it's quiet. High beach season is over. The natives are coming to their guest houses and hotels clean their feathers. Soon it will begin again, repair, painting, renewal. Before you know it, the new summer season is inexorably approaching. Tommy had quite a strong construction business, several crews, qualitatively engaged in the renovation of resort complexes. Activity in these fertile lands for vacationing citizens is profitable, always in demand. Therefore, Tony, unlike Harvey, was quite financially secure. Not that brother then thick after the sale of another interesting program invented by him, then empty, as the money is thrown away on important hardware and other technical things. You've got a hole in your pocket, Harvey, rumbled the younger brother. I was born 10 minutes too late. Seems a lifetime older than you with your pragmatism. Calls to Harvey's apartment door yielded nothing. Tony went to the extreme, opened the door with his spare keys, which he used on rare, exceptional occasions. His brother did not like strangers, even brotherly visits to his territory. An inspection of the room yielded nothing. The usual light clutter on the desk around the computer. A cup with the long-cooled remnants of strong coffee, tangerine skins, a bite of liver. In the washing machine in the kitchen, clean laundry that had already had time to dry, a pan with half-eaten pieces of fried sausage, poured eggs, breadcrumbs, sliced rings and fresh cucumber in a plate on the table, gave the impression that his tidy brother, who usually kept the kitchen in perfect condition, somewhere in a hurry. The question remained, where exactly? Tony and Harvey had recently turned 30. Decision-making age, joked their chuckling mother. You brothers, rabbits already settled down, get married, have children. It's time to have children, and you all one on the fun girls are not amiss. The other to the monitor will stick to the monitor, will not unblue, will not wait for us and my father grandchildren. We could have 2 grandchildren at once. My grandfather and I would walk along seaside alleys with 4 strollers at once. In our family, every generation, we have twins. It's a good thing. Once you had a baby, you're free. The family was from the natives of New York, their grandfathers, on these lands guests of resorts men looked after. It used to be like that. The sea was clean, but there was only seaweed on the shore. On the shore, the sand of yellow sand mixed to the touch is invisible. How many generations grew up here building intricate fortresses and castles out of sand by the sea? Around the city, the fields are endless with a variety of herbs of vine possessions. Rare low scatterings of silent peaks, the very beginning of the great mountains. The climate for health is the healthiest. Aromas of steppe blossoms with sea breeze mix, lungs up to bronchia from impurities release, a painful resort. It's not a hua. This is status. To be treated here in crowds already in the beginning of the 20th century, smart aristocrats from among the British subjects started to come here. They took their children here in the second half of the 19th century. Here and friendly family from generation to generation in every possible way contributed to the health of the population. Grandfathers, great-grandfathers before the Great Patriotic War, and after it fed visiting resort guests with fresh fruit, melons, watermelons, grapes. Backyard garden, vineyard they had almost 20 hectares. Post-war generations of son raised a wonderful, soulful, in children's doctors the guy went. He studied in the big city at the university, returned to his small homeland. All his professional life, he works in children's sanatoriums and takes care of orphans. The profile in their hospital was such, destitute and unaccompanied by their parents and fate abandoned to medical procedures to take. An experienced pediatrician is already 65 years old. So to a well-deserved vacation will not be chased away. Every morning again hurries to work, although that his first precontorium has long been closed, miraculously preserved in the institution after already reconstructions at the Children's Resort of Health Resorts correctly works. His wife Casey, the mother of Harvey and Tony, among the hustling nurses looked out, cheerful and carefree. In spite of all the troubles, she was pretty and very kind. She stayed that way. At first, she couldn't get pregnant for a long time. Not only did they marry when they were both over 30, but their brothers were in no hurry to be born. But Casey at 35, immediately as two from the chest identical from the face were drawn. They were rare naughty boys, Tony the younger, Harvey the older. They looked so much alike that except for Casey and her husband, they were confused by the whole neighborhood. So that in kindergarten, the teacher did not faint from these hooligans, made to copy. Casey was forced to dress them differently. So the boys here and adapted. They started swapping things, one size fits all, making the teacher's heart even more confused. People say that there is a special, almost mystical connection between the two twins. In Harvey and Tony, this property was tenfold increased. One finger hurts, the other cries from pain and fear. The first one's milk tooth fell out, timed it for an hour, and the second one will have a hole in his mouth to brag about. And fought for the truth, and cried and fell asleep under the warring songs of the mother, and loved kindergarten tiftelki with tomato gravy they equally. But the hobbies from childhood were different. One can marvel at this metamorphosis. Harvey raved about technology, read a lot of books as soon as he learned letters for the first time, but at the same time could not tolerate such a subject as math and worshiped literature. Tony knew all rock, pop, hard, country, and other bands by heart. He could guess tracks by the first notes. He danced like Maris Lipa, only without the ballet steps. From the age of 14, he raced secretly in his father's car, thanks to his tall height. Classmates fell in love with himself by the packs, broke little girls' hearts in a casual way, without straining. Harvey was not interested in any other technology except for the electronic one in the computer. Stared at the fair sex and saw nothing. His heart was silent. His soul wasn't panting. I made a joke once, but the lady left. I didn't conduct such experiments anymore. Sometimes he only relieved natural male tension in the company of another girl without complexes, from the numerous entourage of his brother. In one thing, the brothers were united irrevocably in their love for sports. Both had passed the candidate minimum for a master in swimming. Both went to the boxing section. But Harvey still later abandoned. At school, the twins mocked the teachers as they wanted. If there was no control work, frontal surveys were pankemi. Came to class in different guises. Both had short haircuts, brown eyes. But Harvey came to school in a strict classic suit with a turtleneck or shirt. The outfit was complemented by elegant men's shoes, a la a real gentleman, a hobo Tony shabby in jeans. Hoodies, wearing hoodies a couple sizes larger, bright acidic and sneakers. The teachers, knowing their commitment to different styles, calmly accepted the annual test from one, replacing the other, having changed clothes in the school restroom. Tony was in charge of math, literature, Harvey, and so on. In the final grade, Harvey had to pull up math with a tutor. You can't mess with the SATs. You can't tease the committee by changing masks. Tony tutored himself in literature. He did it himself. They took to their studies stoically, so they got their high school diploma. Their parents were getting old. It was uncomfortable for two such big foreheads to sit on their necks forever. They agreed on this opinion without any debate. No one would have believed it before. But Harvey himself, without pulling up by the ears, went to Miami State University to the Faculty of Mathematics, Mechanics, and Computer Science. He lived, breathed, raved about computers. Till his brother was not bored in the Southern capital, Tony applied to Miami State University of Construction. In the student years of the twins were like everyone else. Live student cheerfully from session to session, and sessions only twice a year. Diplomas received, almost without straining. On vacation, they hurried to their native New York. They did not get out of the gentle sea, sunbathed until blackness between the dunes on the hot sand, spreading blankets. We ate sunny fruits, savored fried mullet of fresh catch, cooked ropana in a large cauldron over a fire. Tony usually brought another heartfelt friend to visit his parents. Sometimes the companion took with her, in turn, another young lady for Harvey to find. Empty troubles, brother never fell for it, which amused his parents. Tony then had to entertain two divas. The girlfriend of his girlfriend everywhere annoyingly dragged after him and the objects of his summer passion, not giving the young to be alone. Everything ended the same way. Tony had run out of patience. He'd buy the girls tickets home. He'd find himself a hottie in New York. The years of his almost carefree college years flew by like a blink of an eye. After graduation, the hopeful specialist in innovative it and Harvey was offered to stay in the department, but he fled home with Tony. The two couldn't live apart. Quiet, peace-loving, New York grew and developed by leaps and bounds, as mushrooms after the rain grew from under the ground modern fashionable hotels, from the number of cooler with stars on their epaulettes. Former home estates were transformed into guest houses, middle-class bed and breakfast establishments appeared. Anybody who could get the money was building them. Tony, like a fish in water, plunged into the maelstrom. A year later, he bought himself first an apartment and then a dark Jeep. Not lazy in Harvey days and nights, sat at the screen of a large monitor and corresponded with the same webmasters about their archival things. Inventing, developing, selling, implementing. Started the whole process all over again. I earned a one-room apartment by myself. I knew how to drive a car, but he rarely used it. He passed the theory exams for his license with flying colors. Tony did the driving for him. Well, just in case, his brother is always in the clouds, will hesitate near the sign, will make a wrong turn, no matter what. So I took Tony's car. If it was for something, he never bought his own. Ungrateful son of a bitch. I'd say it like a spell in Tony's brother's apartment. If you show up, I'll kill you. The junk in the door, the rattle of the key in the lock, only the clock ticking in the room. By noon, the sun had already taken its place at the very zenith. Not a word from Harry. At the New York train station, the train arrived exactly on schedule. Lucy stepped out onto the small platform, greedily breathed in the sweet grassy air, looked around. On the small platform at the station, there were rows of cars with checkers, local cab drivers. Their service is chin-chinnerum. To come the spoonfuls of non-locals and take them to New York by the third road, through the village to moth the blessed kilometers and cents. Don't rip off your own people and don't offend them, and bring them home to your native land. Where are you going, my dear? The word of a willing young man rushed to her. I'll deliver you in the best way, redhead. And at once he faltered when he saw the look of Lucy's green eyes. After the forced stay at the guest of the cousin, the girl looked differently. She was shivering and shivered to the bones from her cold. I see you're from our land. The cab driver corrected himself. If money is a problem under the Sagra, I'll take you for cheap. We're all in the same resort world here. We've got to help the land. Lucy gave the man the address of the house where she lived with her mother and stepfather. She decided to see what was going on there first. What she saw shocked her. A brand new hotel stood in the place of their home. There was no sign of the neighbor's property either. Our Charlotte is growing, building on building and building on building, the cab driver boasted. My wife and I moved to the village to New York is only 10 kilometers. We successfully sold our land here at the resort. Now we have a real house there with a large plot of land for a garden. You know the locals don't go to the sea very often. When you want to take a dip, you have a car, and the SCOMU will help you knock down. And where can you rent an apartment in the city? Lucy asked. I'll take you there. Now we'll find you a shelter. on the unspoken real estate market, where they soon found themselves with a cab driver. The girl, surprisingly without delays, found a vacant apartment in the neighborhood High Bank. She gave the intermediary grandmother an advance payment for 3 months in advance, took the keys, and thanked the man for his help. Let me take you to the point. The places there are great. The sea is like in the palm of your hand from the windows. New buildings, well maintained around with playgrounds. There are even open-air swimming pools in the yards. Near a small wasteland in a picturesque neighborhood, Lucy and the cab driver were about to part. He even offered to write down his cell phone number. "You'll need me. I'm always around." And then it dawned on her that she didn't have a cell phone yet. It's not a good idea to be out of touch in the modern world. A hospitable countryman helped her, and with this misfortune, in half an hour she had a brand new phone in her hands. It remained only to master the unknown for her technique and to enter numbers from the paper brought by Lucy from the colony. Friendship. Close trusting convict Lucy did not leave with anyone in the colony. Her dorm mates, blissfully out of this world, considered her to have a morbid love for book novels. But the fascination of the family still played an important role for her in establishing normal contacts with her neighbor. That day, a new girl joined their squad. 5 was brought under the 124th article of the Criminal Code, which penalizes inappropriate medical care that resulted in death. The young woman worked as a surgeon after medical school. She was characterized by a bold, somewhat arrogant character, which in her profession was more of a hindrance than a favorable factor. She was on duty in the emergency room of surgery, where emergency patients from all over the city are brought by ambulance, and examined a girl with typical signs of acute appendicitis. The patient was brought straight from the airport. She was in a hurry to get her to the operating table to prevent peritonitis. Lucy didn't know much about all that stuff. Maybe she didn't get it from the story when the doctors discovered the breach on the patient. Everyone just gasped. Pretty little creature. Turned out to be a transporter. She was carrying around some powder packets inside her, one of which burst and burned everything inside, causing a hell of a lot of cramps. The lab later found out the notorious potion was an experimental novelty. It was highly toxic. The young peddler had no chance of survival, but such a resume was not to her liking. Her father was a powerful businessman from the capital. He personally traveled to the province to look into it. Paid to make the cause of death look different on the paperwork. He tried to get rid of the witnesses in white coats, and he blamed Annabelle's surgeon. That's how she ended up in the bed next to Lucy. Sobbing, hysterical. Couldn't believe this was happening to her. She doesn't remember the trial very well. Arrested in the courtroom. Staged from DC, she and Lucy both ended up from the coast. The book lover treated her with stories of how Annabelle would get out, meet her love, become happy, return to the profession. The latter was controversial, but Lucy presented everything so beautifully, so mesmerizingly that other female inmates began to gather around their romantic circle. They made up a story about me. They asked the new author, "You're blessed. What if God hears your mantras and prayers? And prosperity for us?" Evenings out have become a system. When one of the convicts had a bad time at home and they found out about it, they immediately went to Lucy with a request to calm my happiness. They generously shared the parcels with the inmates. Lucy, except intrigues, had nothing to give them. She only enveloped everyone who wished it, with a tale of the future, a life of being at large. All hoped, all believed. All waited for it to be as the redhead had told them it would be. Tomorrow Lucy will go to register with the authorities. At the same time, she will find out how it happened that she was registered in the place where she used to be registered. Now the hotel is welcoming guests. It seems there are lines in the law that she has the right to return from the zone to the place where she once lived. The massive new building, where it was not possible to rent a one-room apartment with furnishings, was quite high, dense thickets. It seems that the builders did not begin to uproot these thickets, did not raise their hand to destroy the colorful flowers and juicy emerald leaves. Now, however, by the fall, all this beauty has somewhat faded, but the remnants of luxurious flora still look charming. It was about 100 meters to the entrance. When the girl heard sobs in the bushes, the idea of herself further to seek adventure warned her inner voice. Her feet were already carrying herself to the incomprehensible sounds. What she saw, pushing apart the frescoes of a 10-meter plant, shocked her. On the ground lay a young man agonizing on his stomach, a knife sticking out of his back, around which there was a bloody stain on his light-colored jacket. At first, it was unclear whether the man was conscious or unconscious. "Just don't touch the handle. You just got parole," This incident will be pinned on you. Anna's mind was racing. Go to your new apartment, drop your stuff, think about the situation and come back. If you decide to do that, don't call the police. Then you're dead. I gave myself mental instructions and followed them like a robot. I left my backpack of prison gear in the hallway, memorized a list of phone numbers, found Annabelle's number to try my luck. Maybe her girlfriend, who'd gotten out of the zone 6 months ago, would answer and give her a clue. In a metallic voice, the phone gave out the caller was temporarily off the network, but you could leave a message. Annabelle, it's blessed. Lucy mentally smiled. Gotta start weaning herself off the habits of the zone. Calling names by nicknames. I'm out on parole and back in New York today. Call me when you can. She grabbed her cell phone and ran back to the man in the bushes. He was lying in the same position. Eyes open, but it looked like he was in some bad shape. How come no one had discovered him here yet? Lucy asked herself questions that had no answers. This place needs a doctor. What good am I? I don't even know if I can get the knife out of his body. As if in answer to her doubts, the man looked up at her with brown eyes with thick and dark lashes. Seeing the red-headed wonder above him, he was dumbfounded. But then, gathering all his last strength, whispered into his pocket for the cell phone. Find Tony's contact. Make the call. He passed out again. The girl began fumbling through all his pockets. How has the world changed? She pondered. The courtyards of any high-rise in New York used to be noisy, crowded fun. I've been here for 10 minutes. In that time, no one has passed by. The playground with slides is empty, almost silently a car parked at the far entrance. Once again, there's no one around. Though maybe that's for the best. After a painstaking search, the device was found in the back pocket of her jeans. Lucy barely got it out of there, trying not to cause the man any more pain. The unknown Tony's cell phone was found at once. The answer came instantly. Harvey, where did you disappear to? You've never disappeared from the radar screen for so long before. It wasn't Harvey, Lucy replied deeply. For some reason, she was pricked by the stranger's anxious tone. I'm so worried about my relative. Who are you and what do you have to do with the man I found in the bushes near my house? She asked. What bushes? Interrupted her interlocutor. Did my brother get drunk or something? And now you're seducing him with your charms. I've met some dumb ones, but you will give them a head start, said the girl sharply. Do you even know how to listen to other people? I found your brother in the bushes with a live wound in his back. I've seen him for the first time in my life, but I'm not used to leaving those who are in trouble, she said, without missing, and then Tony said out loud, Dictate the address and I'll be right there. I don't know the exact address. I just got out of the zone yesterday. I'm here today, Lucy said angrily. I rented an apartment in my native New York, in a neighborhood, I think. It's called the High Shore. It's getting worse by the hour. I hope you didn't sew him up there in a fit of passion. Her companion smiled. Lucy did not take his jest and replied, You guessed it, I was just on the 100th article of the Criminal Code. But it wasn't me who nailed your family. Tony immediately slowed down and said, What happened to Harvey? That he was with a young lady's jailbird. It's time to go, to find out, to put everything in order. Asking the stranger to go, read the exact address and house number, he jumped into his Jeep and rushed to the scene of the tragedy. Tony had expected anything, but he had never expected Lucy to come out of the bushes to meet him. Even in her modest, discreet attire, she looked like a lovely specimen of feminine beauty. She did not look like a criminal in the least. The man was confused, which was completely out of character for him. With flashing green eyes, Lucy led him to her brother, and then her cell phone came to life in her pocket. It was Annabelle. Lucy, honey, you're out, she shouted into the phone. Oh, I'm so glad, my blessed friend. How much did you do for me in prison? If it wasn't for your support, I would have broken down, died, surrendered to the will of fate. Tony listened with interest to the disorderly, excited monologue. With this convict, everything is not so simple as it goes. But Harvey must be helped now. At this time, in a nutshell, Lucy, not in the least lurking, outlined the situation to Annabelle. She responded without question. You don't have to shine. You're just over 80 kilometers away. I'm in a car. I'll be there in 2 hours. Move the guy to a safe place so as not to touch the knife in his back. When I get there, I'll do it myself. Lucy turned to Tony and made her point. Okay, so my friend's a molder. She's a surgeon by profession, according to you. but she's been suspended from practicing medicine. I don't think she's lost her skills. Why don't you go pick up your brother carefully and carry him to my apartment? I'm on the first floor. We'll manage. The girls stepped to the exit of the bushes to see if their way is free from unnecessary witnesses. Check the cameras, Tony whispered in her back. Residential neighborhoods like this are packed with them nowadays. I don't know the circumstances of Harvey's accident, but I don't think you mean him any harm. Harvey was transported perfectly. He wasn't even conscious. At Lucy's apartment, they put him on the couch. Still on his stomach, they pre-filled the surface beneath him with clay taken from the kitchen table. I haven't been here more than 10 minutes. I haven't gotten the hang of it yet, the girl explained her unfamiliarity with the area. I'm going to plug in the refrigerator. I'll see if there's a kettle and some utensils in the kitchen. I might need some boiling water. You go to the drugstore. Get some dressings. Broad-spectrum antibiotics, iodine, saline, hydrogen peroxide, painkillers, that's on discount. I don't know what else you might need. After a moment's thought, she added in her own way. Also go to the supermarket. You'll need a food supply and drinking water. Give me your phone number and I'll put it on the list. I don't want to go through your brother's phone anymore. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not a caregiver for you or your brother. Tony was eager to run errands. Lucy, powerless, sank into the chair and began to stare at the man lying on the couch. Both brothers were handsome. One could sense at once that they were both endowed with charm, even though one of them was now lying in her rented apartment like a motionless cube of flour with an involuntarily throbbing body. Lucy had carried them to the colonies. When the cars were sent to unload the bakeries, they had their own on the grounds, but they never became real bakers. The flour wouldn't listen. It stuck to her hands and tried to take on an ugly shape as she molded powerful products. God, when would she finally stop living her life in the zone? Every moment of time paralleled her dreams. How would she know that? She came across a couple of outwardly masculine strangers, athletic builds. The eyes of the second one were like two brown lightning bolts. In the morning, Lucy had not imagined that a man could attract her, and even more so to awaken the female essence inside, to make her feel something hitherto unknown. Who to tell about the fact that she had never had physical intimacy with a member of the opposite sex? No one would believe it. She didn't have time. It didn't work out. After the incident with her stepfather, for a long time with a shudder, she was disgusted just by the thought of this side of the relationship between the two opposite sexes. After a couple of years of imprisonment began to throw her signs of attention, one of the convoyers. Mostly there were female guards, and here they sent a young soldier to help her on duty, and she was 20 at that time. Yes, and he is still young and clearly inexperienced. One day, on his watch, there was an engagement party in the colony. He went into the shower room to see her. The story with the stepfather didn't repeat itself. The kid only got to the door when she couldn't keep up with the others. He hesitated, and the sight of him made her so angry. There was something unprecedented in her eyes. Fearful, dangerous, wild. The guard, without saying a word, retreated, and then he turned his male attention to a young girl with no special complexes. The girl said that they even got along for a long time. At night, quiet mouse and outside, and on his watch the girl from the cell disappeared until morning. Then, when the time was up, he'd meet her from the zone. And how did it end? No one was interested afterwards. Here would be with their lovers on the outside, unattended left men each correctly disposed of. The phone rang on the table. It was Annabelle. A little confused about New York, out of habit, figuring out the address, Lucy told Harvey on the couch. He was still unconscious, punctuating his moaning and panting. Finally, the doorbell rang at the apartment, Annabelle and Tony piling in almost simultaneously. After sending him to the kitchen to sort out food and medicine, both women returned to the wounded man. "You'll take over," the doctor ordered in a moment. "Help me turn him a little. That's good now, and turn on all the lights in the room." Watching the quick, dexterous movements of the former surgeon was a real pleasure. For former doctors who had taken the Hippocratic Oath. Annabelle removed the knife, reporting that the penetration was not deep at all. No vital organs were hit, but there is blood loss, which is not good. After all the manipulations, she protected the patient, who immediately started mumbling something. "Well done. You bought everything correctly," she praised Lucy and Tony. "Now I will inject your victim with antibiotics and painkillers. He should come to his senses soon." To the doctor, "Why didn't you, my precious ones, The wound could have been much more serious. First, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this case. My brother and crime are on different paths. They're very far apart. I'm the one who gets hit on sometimes for business. He's kind of a quiet drunk, doesn't even go out with the ladies. He's always at his computer. Our parents are old medics, so they decided not to bother them. Thanks a lot, Annabelle. I'll take care of it. Now my brother's awake, I'll take him home with me. Don't even think about it. Annabelle was immediately outraged. It'll take 2 or 3 days to transport him. We don't know how the wound will behave. So what am I supposed to do now? Ask you for a permanent position? Tony smiled, as imperturbable as ever. I don't even know your name yet. Lucy, without extra curtsies, answered the girl. And you and your brother Tony and Harvey? That's what I've been drawing. Found the document, Annabelle said. I trust her, like myself. Too much has happened to us today. Half an hour later, the whole company, except Harvey, was having coffee over Lucy's stock in the kitchen. Tony hadn't thought to buy anything for hot drinks. The sausage and cheese Tony had brought were in use. The sandwiches with them all tasted divinely delicious. Oh, I've got some gingerbread, Lucy remembered, and about 200 grams of cognac left in the bottle. The guys added cognac to their coffee and discussed the day's adventures with gingerbread, which turned out to be a real pastry masterpiece. At night, everyone decided to stay in the apartment. So, while the stores were open, Tony went to buy bed linen, towels, shampoos, toothpaste, and soaps. He couldn't resist. He went to the specialty store and bought elite coffee, turkey, sugar, chocolates, cookies. We should treat the girls to a little something sweet, considering where they both spent more than 1 year. Oh, the fates of women. How different they can be. Lucy had briefly told him who'd been nailed and why, and for some reason, he believed her unconditionally, unquestioningly. Annabelle had split too. How she was deprived of her favorite profession. Now she's a checkout girl at the supermarket. At least she got a job there. When Tony came back, he was dozing on the chair by the bedside. Lucy was in the kitchen trying to boil broth from chicken thighs. Tony was going to go to the kitchen too, so as not to make noise in the room. But then Harvey opened his eyes, looked around the surprisingly unfamiliar room, felt the bandage on his chest with his hand. Where am I? Don't worry, I'm right here, Tony reassured him. What the hell did you get yourself into? You never pulled a stunt like that on me before. To clean up the aftermath of you and Nancy running away from a nightclub 3 days ago. Why did you pick up Nancy? I took her back to my place. There were no other chicks around. That night the day before, Harvey was at the Monitor as usual. The day before, he'd spent a long time with his brother stopping by. Tony had just finalized another promising deal and had come to Harvey's house to celebrate his success in his business endeavor. He brought with him a whole basket of delicacies, a couple of cases of excellent beer. Harvey's bachelor pad was just out of clear supplies. I couldn't get a delivery. And then Mother Teresa showed up, as always with a good grunt and gifts. Sort out the food, my electronic whoa. When are you going to get a girlfriend to cook borscht and bake pies? As if you need your passion for borscht. Harvey grumbled, already munching without any heat treatment on smoked wieners and grunting with dramatic pleasure. You ring some person yourself. It's not necessary to observe the laws of brotherly seniority. Half an hour later, potatoes were already frying in the frying pan. On the kitchen table, there was a platter of fish and seafood, and Tony was masterfully chopping a salad of fresh cucumbers and tomatoes. Both of them were drinking beer and sharing the news. Harvey was finishing up a new computer program that he had not yet tested enough. This time he was drawn to medicine. The finished product was to be of interest to pharmaceutical companies for identification of medicines. The man had already been working on this project for several months, following a tip from a virtual colleague from Germany. The latter took on another part of the turnover of drugs and therapeutic agents, promising Harvey that together they would sell their brainchild to interested people in the West for good money. Tony did not see such bright prospects from the overhaul of one old hotel in New York. The resort complex was too visibly outdated, but it had that classic thoroughness that has become more and more in vogue lately. The customer wanted to get something in the style of romantic Baroque, with all these domes, colonnade, plenty of details, bright colors of the facade. Tony at first grabbed his head, but then suddenly realized that he and his guys themselves had a lot of fun to work with such a task. So in the professional sphere, both brothers were not bored. In the afternoon, Tony and his new partner customer signed a contract for a tidy sum. Harvey, too, seemed to see the light at the end of the tunnel. "Hey, bro, why don't we go on a couple of vacations later? The sea and its delights are just around the corner, but I'd like to see some oceans overseas. Maldives is a bit expensive, but Thailand or Vietnam with their tropical paradise is the best." Tony's already drunk. "Aha, we will book a separate bungalow so that right on the shore with aquamarine and warm water yellow, velvet sand sea creatures to dive." They would have continued dreaming, but then there was a call on Harvey's cell phone from a German comrade. It turned out that he also spent the whole day at the negotiations, where he announced not only his program and his partner's developments. An excited Kurt shouted into the receiver, "Please hurry up." He spoke even louder. "I've been texting you and you're not answering." Harvey rushed to his computer, and there were indeed 3 messages from Kurt with attachments in his email. He'd have to sit up at night to sort through them all in detail. He went into Tony's kitchen and explained the situation. "It's all right," his brother said. "I'll stay the night. I'm gonna put my headphones on. I'll watch a movie or something and have another beer." When Harvey was immersed in his favorite world of programming, he stopped noticing anything around him. In the morning, he saw that his brother so diligently absorbed beer, that all soiled in it and in the fish, like a piglet, smiling at the underdog who did not even move through things into the washing machine to tidy up. Tony put a clean set of clothes on the chair next to the couch. It took 3 hours for the sleeping guest to get into the awake phase. Made himself some coffee, washed the dishes. After their drinking, he carefully covered Harvey, lying on the air mattress with a warm plaid, and was gone. Work would not wait. The chain of coincidences began to gain momentum and acquire new links. In the evening of the next day, Harvey found that to the remnants of tasty gifts brought yesterday by Tony, catastrophically lacking bread, fish without cereals, and potatoes he did not recognize. It was not desirable to search long for outer garments for himself, so he pulled Tony's light windbreaker from the rope in the bathroom. It was not so warm and cozy outside in autumn as in summer. To his annoyance, there were no bakery products in the nearest grocery store. All dismantled people hurrying home under the cozy barrel of the TV. "I will go to the neighboring microdistrict Vysokieberg. There they have recently opened a supermarket. I'll buy coffee and sweets at the same time," the man decided, and quickened his step. He had to walk for at least 20 minutes. In the vicinity of the new buildings, not all the infrastructure has not yet been set up at the entrance to the store. Notice the company of the local major, Shaggy Golden Boy, so nicknamed for his luxurious hair with an African accent, blonde hair, sticking unruly in all directions like springs. Next to him, grinning at his loyal friends, 2 big foreheads were whispering hotly in the ear of their kingpin. He took a step forward. "Tommy, are you out of your mind? Don't you know that Katie's my girlfriend, that she and I are serious?" the shaggy man said, but his smile looked evil and his voice sounded mocking. Harvey had heard about Katie leaving the hangout with Tony a couple days before this evening. The man had told him about it yesterday. Like the fact that he didn't drag the girl against her will to drink, she was all over him and throwing inviting glances at him all the time. Tony never liked that type of girl. He wasn't going to drag her into bed. But already on the street, KT suddenly came out from the corner of the club and whispered pitifully, "Take me away from here, Tony. I hate that cocky face of his buddies. Why does the shaggy one think he owns me? I slept with him once, and now he won't let me go to a party without him blaming me." Tony had always had an easy-talking nature, and now he was relieved that Kathy didn't have any plans for him tonight. Putting his arm around the girl's waist, he walked her to his car. He was off work at the club and hadn't missed a drink. The girl lived far away, a satellite town in New York, but that didn't bother him. They chatted for a while on the way, and then Kathy dozed off. She'd only apologized for hitting on Tony to get the shaggy one to come off. At the house, she quickly slipped out of the car, a grateful peck on Tony's cheek. "If Shaggy asks what's going on with you and me, please tell him we're together. You're a big name around here. Maybe that leftist asshole and his gang will finally leave me alone." Remembering Tony's story last night about Kathy's request, Harvey decided to play along with his brother. "Forget about Katie. She's with me now," he replied, shaggy-haired, and disappeared through the store doors. "Are you going to regret this, asshole?" He was followed by the angry hissing of the curly-haired handsome man. Having bought all the necessary things, Tony decided to take a shortcut and walk to his house by the courtyards, past the already built houses and the construction sites that were working hard even in the dark. There weren't many streetlights around, but he was never afraid. He had already forgotten about the incident at the store. He was thinking in his head how to improve the project he and Kurt were working on. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him right away, so a slight suspicious rustle decided that the cats had become active by night, snooping through the bushes near the beautiful cities. I stopped to smell the almost bright pink flower. What happened next? He could no longer see. A shadow flickered behind him. He was hit in the head with something heavy. Losing consciousness, he felt a prick in his back, similar to the manipulations of a nurse giving inoculations. A split second later, he blacked out. He came to himself twice, but he couldn't figure out where he was or what had happened to him. He seemed to be dreaming, even pleasant dreams. He'd and Tony on the islands, in a lonely villa, just above the ocean. He'd seen something like that in a commercial about traveling to the other side of the world, where coconuts and palm trees grow and bounty bars are made. The vision was a bright red blur, flashed above him as it seemed to him, right on the wooden stretcher leading to his and Tony's cabin over the smooth sea. Then he vaguely felt himself being dragged gently somewhere. In an awkward downward position, belly down. More sharp pain, the gray eyes of some woman in a white robe. More pain. Another failure. He woke up to the fact that there was not a single calm cell left in his body. It hurt everywhere at once. For a second, he heard his brother's voice in the distance, or was he imagining it again? Harvey opened his eyelids with great difficulty. Where am I? The men looked exactly alike. One was the quick, smiling Tony, who was always hanging around her. The other was now in her room in the capable hands of Annabelle Harvey. The woman gave him a bandage, getting ready to leave for home. She had to leave for work in Houston early in the morning. Something incomprehensible, hitherto unknown, and therefore frightening, was going through the girl's mind. It can't be, because it can never be with me. She said to herself like a prayer, but she was irresistibly attracted physically to two male representatives at once. She had not known before that such an ordinary, natural feminine desire for carnal love at such a wrong, inappropriate moment. And her hands are shaking, and Tony kept his eyes on her, as if some currents from her were reaching his gut. Nonsense, absurd, more like a shock, a fog, an obsession. It doesn't have to be like this. It is. Shove your misunderstandings to the back of your mind. Haven't you had enough adventures with men in your life? These feelings are stronger than her. It's not inappropriate for her to bring up a Jack London novel. The Little Mistress of the Big House. His heroine, I think her name was Paula, couldn't choose between two men and said goodbye to life. And yes, you're losing your mind. My star is bringing Lucy back to reality again. None of them are even going to notice you. Take advantage of the circumstances offered. It'll be over, and they'll disappear from your life. You're a criminal. An ex-con with a stigma on your bio. They're both so cute. Why would they want a treasure like you? Like a somnambulist, the girl is escorted to the door. Annabelle half-heartedly listens to the fact that their doctor informs them that he won't be in until the day after tomorrow. They have a supermarket, open 24 hours a day. It's a long shift ahead. From the kitchen comes Tony's joyful exclamation, "Lucy, look what I found. A cup with a spout from such dishes on the waters drink mineral water. I'll pour some broth in it and feed it to Harvey. Meanwhile, you fill the rest of the chicken broth with something. There's potatoes, vermicelli. I'm hungry, so I'm exhausted." The girl obediently goes to the kitchen to cook soup. Thoughts of two men who suddenly appeared in her life briefly led her out of captivity. The soup, cooked hastily, turns out to be delicious and nourishing. And Tony sincerely thanks the skillful woman. Fed Harvey, fed Tony falls into a restful sleep. I have to work in the morning again. What are your plans? Lucy, you can watch your brother while I'm gone. As soon as he wakes up, we'll eat right away. I know you don't have time for us. I've got my own problems. I have to register with the police with my parole. Discipline first. Then I'll go to the store for supplies and wait for you here. They go to bed in a peculiar way. Tony gives the girl more trump seats on the chair, and he himself settles on the floor at her feet. In the darkness, Lucy can see that the man's eyes glitter in the rare flashes of car headlights, sometimes passing through the yard below the windows. Both are silent, thinking about their own things. If someone had told me that a red-haired witch with green eyes would persistently inhabit my head, I would have made that person laugh. Thinks Tony in silence. He'd always had a disdain for pink snot twirling. In his opinion, some over-romanticized naturals have a love affair. And now, hello, while we were having dinner. Suddenly, he imagined Lucy making him soup. Not here, but in his apartment. There are little kids running around shouting, "Mommy, Daddy, we're going to the amusement park on Saturday." And he's Tony, the head of the household, and he says, "Whoever does their homework the best today will go on the swings and slides." That's what a happy, carefree family looks like. Only trouble from these women charm. Good men lose their heads. But this girl is totally different. No eye contact. Jeans, sweatshirt, and making her figure without a uniform. Took off only at night, when she lay down under the blanket and pulled it almost to her nose. He didn't listen very carefully to her story about the prison term. Remembered the main thing: stepfather molested, she accidentally nailed him. Inexperienced, naive, not spoiled she was. There's not much to be surprised about. Life is what kind of surprises and twists and fates like the present. It's not a pretty story with Katie. He will deal with this handsome curly-haired man separately, as well as with his friends. They'll be shocked they stabbed Harvey in a hurry to scare him, not him. Without the cops, he'll pull the wings off the majors. He's got one man in mind, who Tony's crew made the house look nice. He's got a beef with Shaggy, for hurting him too. Tony tried to think of anything he could think of, but it was no use. Lucy stood in front of him the moment she emerged from the bushes. What was happening to him? Has he fallen in love? Nonsense, he can't wait for them all to make his heart on the altar of feelings. He's got one. He's got feelings for Harvey and his parents. A woman has no place in it, but his nature is masculine and refused to resist. The miracle that happened didn't care who Lucy was, what was wrong with her, or how. It was his time to become half of something whole. A thing of which songs are sung, legends are written. Rolling around on the floor, almost sleepless. Rising easily, he went to brew coffee in a brand new turbo for himself, and the girl now hugging the pillow in the chair. No sleeping conditions whatsoever. She sleeps sweetly in herself. Woke the girl up soon. "Hey, Ginger Sonia, wake up. It's time to go to the police. I've boiled some eggs, made some butter sandwiches. Eat up and go." "Thanks, Tony. It's been a long time since anybody's met me for breakfast in this life. It's been years since I've been with a couple like that." At once from sleep all pink after a shower, Lucy enthusiastically ate the prepared breakfast. She thanked the knight for his service and went to the city. She came back quickly gloomy, explained her bewilderment about the house of residence registration. "I don't know who my mother strained, but I was discharged to nowhere when the house was sold. She herself got married again and left with her husband somewhere in the north. The trail goes on and on." "Forget it," Tony told her. "Everyone's D's boomerang back on them. And you, on the contrary, wish your parent good health and happiness. Let her go with God." Lucy took the shopping from the market into the kitchen. She disappeared behind the bathroom door, having previously pulled a warm terry robe off the hook in the closet. She felt chilly, asked Tony to put the kettle on or make coffee. For a long time she scrubbed her face under a stream of hot water. The filth of family betrayal was destroying, then appeared in the kitchen. The man put his arm around Lucy for support and comfort. She smelled of herbs, retained the remnants of fragrance, shampoo, or shower gel, but in his arms she did not immediately deceive like the other young ladies. Everything pulled like a string. "Get your hands off me or I won't vouch for myself." Tony immediately recovered with difficulty equalizing his breathing. And Annabelle was working her magic on him. His eyes darkened with desire. His hand was almost out of focus. He tried again, rushing forward to catch up with the girl. Hiding in his kitchen, she stood in the middle of the room with a knife in her hands. "Are you crazy? I'm not going to do anything against your will. I like you so much I'm losing control. Don't start wooing me from my dark demon bottom. I just checked in today. I'm about to start a new life. What have I done to you that you want to put me on the zone for relapse?" The man abruptly turned 180 degrees, grabbed a jacket from the coat rack in the hallway, slammed the door, ran off to work. Lucy burst into tears in the kitchen so as not to wake Harvey. Again the disappointment, again she was wrong about the man she had begun to sympathize with. No, he let her go right away. But again it was ugly, again it was vile. Something forever burned in her heart and soul about Tony. It's ridiculous for such a grown-up girl to play with a man's interest. Maybe, but she was again covered in an icy shell of mistrust, ready to hide in the shell of such a hard fruit as a coconut, not to be found, not to be forged into the light of day. She couldn't seem to do anything about it either. She'll be looking for a job in an all-female group. She'll go to the hotel for the season, clean and scrub as a cleaning lady. She'll go around town and ask people if any guest house owners will respond. The only person I know now is Annabelle. You can't rekindle old connections. You can't put them to good use. Tony's been going on and on all day. Fool. What a fool he is to scare away the only female creature I've ever felt real warm feelings for. Unexpected, quick, but he was sure it would be the only one in his destiny. At work, he answered inappropriately to his subordinates, bought the wrong building materials at the base. He had to make a return, explain himself to the sellers, argue, prove. I was afraid to go to Lucy's apartment in the evening, to look her in the eye. Intuitively felt that he had lost her once and for all, disgusted by such a trifle for him. How many skirts around him he had passed through without thinking, changing like gloves. And now he found himself in the position of a petitioner. Lucy met him, nonchalantly escorted him to Harvey, who for the first time in the last 2 days was sitting on the sofa instead of lying down. The girl made him a bowl of cottage cheese with sour cream and honey, and he was eating it with evident pleasure. He's on the mend. We are strong people. Tony thought to himself with satisfaction. We've got to get out of here. How does His Majesty Earl Harvey Sr. feel? When will the order to leave his palace be given? Harvey's answer was unexpectedly stubborn. We have already discussed the subject with Lucy. Tomorrow, Annabelle will come and examine me. We'll see about authorization. That's how I'm gonna move in. And you, Tony, you don't have to suffer sleeping on the floor anymore. The landlady's doing a fine job with me. Now that's a twist of the ear, Tony thought. Yeah, they're already working together behind my back, making friends with each other. And then he felt ashamed. He remembered how Harvey hadn't hesitated to call him by the name of Shaggy's company, how he'd accepted his version of events with Kathy without reservation, and how he never uttered a word of reproach to Tony. He could have reminded him of his penchant for constant promiscuity with the opposite sex. In his head, out of nowhere, came the words of a song, bound together by the same chain, bound together by one purpose. I have no one more kin, Tony besieged himself. And the rat of jealousy, I'm about to drive out of my heart. Lucy fiddled in the kitchen and did it with obvious pleasure, smelled pies, borscht, with dill badge homemade cutlets. Tony's mouth watered at such luxury. Soon we'll have dinner. Lucy peeked out of the kitchen. Imagine, guys, I missed so much the usual woman's business that I dropped by the market after the police picked up everything. And here I was practicing. What a blessing it is to have a house and voices in it. Lucy, what kind of a house is it? It's an illusion and the voices in it are alien. But it was so enchanting, she thought. Let it be so, let it be for a few days. But I have an ephemeral semblance of family. Ghostly, not real, artificially created by a stalemate, and still marvelous. She didn't respond to Tony anymore because there was no attraction. It came at a bad time and went away under the pressure of circumstances. She looked at Harvey like a mother. I wanted to feed him, take pity on him. Not created for love, for relationships, for a cell of society. So there was nothing to open your mouth and dream of. One tiny childish experiment on Tony's part was enough to realize I came into this world for something else. I'll never survive me or the pretender to my body. Tony admired the girl sadly. Harvey was surprised to realize that he hadn't remembered his programs for 2 days. His cell phone was lost somewhere in the bushes. He just realized that now. Kurt must have cut all the invisible wires. Tony and Lucy volunteered to look for Harvey's cell phone. They searched the grass for a long time, but they cut off the cheap device like a cow with their tongues. In general, all the search was useless, and Tony went to Harvey's apartment to bring his laptop and buy a new smartphone. A little tired, Harvey volunteered to do the dishes after dinner, but he didn't have the energy for it, so he was escorted back to the couch. The man lay down thinking. There was something in the air, some vibe in the apartment, but he could not identify what was really going on. Tony's tense. Lucy's all like the taut strings of a fragile violin. Feelings are budding between them. But then why does Harvey himself turn inside out at the thought? He began to go through beads of memories of the night he'd been attacked. The most vivid seemed to be the moment when he came to his senses for a moment and saw a red cloud with 2 green dots leaning toward his face. There seemed to be no such thing as red-headed angels. But it seemed to him now that he had met just him, the guardian of his life, not afraid to get involved in the consequences of other people's strife. And the fact that he is now lying in the apartment of this brave girl, on her sofa enjoying pies and cutlets, in her kitchen, eating tasty cottage cheese from her hands, this is a new miracle. Harvey's musings were interrupted by Tony returning from his computer. but Harvey reacted sluggishly to his iron friend. Without active interest, he wrote only that he was sick and would return to the program later, and immediately closed the lid of the laptop. A little caught in the hallway brother quickly slipped away in the evening twilight. He and Lucy were alone in the apartment, and Harvey asked her quietly, "Tell me your story. All from the beginning in detail. I have heard only fragments to think and fantasize is not mine. I want to hear it all from you." Lucy looked at the man, and then she burst into tears. Quite serene in her childhood, her father's flight to the north to earn money, her mother's floundering in search of a hearty friend, and the appearance of her stepfather in their house, who managed to put the young pretty schoolgirl's vigilance to sleep with gifts and affectionate speeches. About Vegas and Chicago, about dreams of becoming an author of women's novels, about that dreadful day when she ran to share with her family the news of her college admission, the fight with her stepfather who was hiding his plans. About the colony at first, she wanted to narrate sparingly, but then she took out of her memory the stories and those novels that she invented for them, so that she didn't want to howl with Lonnie. About her acquaintance with Annabelle the surgeon and her difficult fate, about the convoy and how she had almost made trouble again. Harvey was a magical listener. It began to seem to Lucy that her life was not the worst thing that could happen under this earthly sky. She spoke laughingly now of her mission to save a glorious young man in Denver, of the unique taste of smoked sausage on the train, and the sweetness of oatmeal cookies eaten with strong coffee. The man was shocked at her candor and trust in him, at her loneliness on this planet, at her boldness in pushing the girl into the bushes with him. In response to the strange sounds, he wanted to say something very nice, but the words froze on his lips. Then he just stroked her hand softly, gently, affectionately, and she didn't push it away. And she didn't pull her own hand, clasped in his fingers. They sat like that for almost an hour, holding hands. They talked until almost morning. They brewed coffee twice, but they did not want to interrupt the dialogue under any pretext. Lucy had the feeling that she had been to confession, at the kind monk relieved her soul, without shyness and without thinking how it all looked from the outside. Harvey was drowning in tenderness. This girl struck him to the heart of a criminal with a pure heart. The fragile flower had not broken in the crucible of adversity. He had a strange feeling for her. He wanted to become for her all at once an umbrella from the sun and rains, a canopy from rockfall, a wall from trouble, and yet a strong burning desire to take advantage of her beauty he did not feel, even smiled to himself. "A prince or a knight for your lady, Mr. Musketeer. This princess is attracted to all sorts of things you will not notice." He did not leave the feeling that fate had confronted him with a certain test from which he must come out with honor. Like some hero of the love affairs Lucy was so fond of, a knight without fear and reproach, I throw myself at the feet of the charming woman who demands nothing in return. The next day, as promised, Annabelle arrived. The examination of the patient pleased her immensely. That's what means a young organism, a couple of weeks, and you can sign up in the queue of applicants for the honorary position of astronaut. She approved Harvey's move to his own apartment without any hesitation. That same evening, Tony picked him up, and they left Lucy's place. The girl could enjoy her own freedom again, but she was sad. In order not to finally give up from despondency, she persistently searched for at least some workplace. A vacancy was found in the hotel that was built on the site of her parents' house. Isn't that a sign of good luck? The manager of the hotel complex calmly accepted the news that Lucy had served her time. She only asked a little bit who the girl had wiped off the face of the earth and why. She hummed understandingly. This strong-willed elderly Armenian woman had once served her term as a senior son. Her daughter went to the capital, and there her next scumbag frowned and threw her out on the street with a belly higher than her nose. Never asked her to marry him. Frederick, my son, found him under guard, shot him once. The sharp-eyed boy hit the heart on the first try. Of course he was tried. Sure, served 12 years in a maximum security penal colony on parole. Then he got out, for good behavior. A young mom survived. Soon married a widower with 2 children, lives happily. Only her brother, the protector, was long saddened. Lucy began to work with enthusiasm and responsibility. She came home late, but now she could afford the rent of the apartment, with which there was so much to do without stress. A couple of times she had been spotted outside her house by Tony, asking her to go to a restaurant for dinner or asking her to visit. She wouldn't go and she wouldn't let him in the house. Though she saw the man realized everything and would not pester again, I kept my heart quiet, for crying out loud. And Harvey, remembered with warmth, was grateful to him for that night of revelations. from Tony, learned that his brother, all tip-top with health, all immersed in the completion of the project, going to Germany for the presentation of his program. Went to see Annabelle in Houston on the weekends. Sometimes she'd visit her in New York. We'd sit around, reminisce, eat cake. They had just opened a divine, delicious dessert coffee shop in New York. The women nicknamed it Sweet Brain Blast. It was impossible to resist. Life got better, life got more fun. Just the words of the heroine of fate from the movie Chicago, doesn't believe in tears. For some reason, they kept running through my head. Don't tell anyone that when you achieve everything in life, you want to forget the wolf even more. Tony had fundamentally changed his principles, his traditions, his rituals, his ways. Harvey's abusers were punished severely. Dad was forced to send his son abroad to study. That way he'd be smart enough to learn. The beating up of his buddies, they're being subtly criminalized. They've been on the edge of the knife all the time. They'll be serving time for a long time. They'll have time to think about everything. Baroque mansions. Tony and his crew made them for his client so that the whole neighborhood went to them like museums. A package of contracts for the future. Almost all of them couldn't fit in the puffy folders anymore. The money was flowing rightly into nightclubs and parties. As cut off, even to himself, the man did not want to admit that raved Lucy lived thoughts and dreams about her. She was as adamant as a rock. Moreover, he saw, as soon as he held out his hand to her with a bouquet of flowers, she, driving prickly, turned. She didn't want to show it to him. But her eyes were frozen ice, her body tensing. Her gait was becoming like that of a statue. He couldn't hurt her again. She realized that unrequited his feelings with her own hands had ruined everything. Ruined it for himself. He still remembered the velvet skin of her body, the herbal plume of the scent of her hair, her confusion. The first moment and the icy anger. The second, it didn't work out. It didn't work out. Hopelessness and hopelessness. No one would believe that sometimes without her, loved, desired, so dear, he didn't want to go on living. Silent Harvey to his goal to wake up the sleeping beauty, to remove from her shackles of fear of the physical component of the relationship between a man and a woman moved slowly, not on the spur. He did not realize that he loved Lucy at once. His experience was not great in this part. He knew the other thing firmly. He didn't care how it would be for him in the future. The main thing was to bring Lucy back to a full life, with or without him. But she must become as happy as the female characters in her sentimental reading. Their joint brainchild with Kurt went through a presentation in Germany with flying colors. Both developers shone afterwards at the banquet like polished silver coins. Several contracts were signed for implementation of the common program in reputable pharmaceutical corporations. The next step was to offer development in the USA. He had a lot of work ahead of him. He'd only seen Lucy a couple of times. He didn't ask her out on a casual date. He gave her time to come to her senses after the zone, to breathe fully, to settle down, to stand on her own feet. Lucy now no longer worked as a cleaner in the hotel. She was preparing to become an animator, to lead in the evening's performances for the tourist public, to get the crowd in a half turn. It turned out marvelous. Language, imagination irrepressible. Even for the children's audience could come up with such contests and pranks. Adults swooned with delight and interest. In New York came into its rights exuberant spring, recovered from the winter chill yard, which played in the lives of three people not the least role. In the distance shone aquamarine highlights of the sea. The resort froze in anticipation of the new beach season. Many establishments were going to open their doors hospitably, and by the May vacation, they were rubbing their hands, shashliks, washing their stalls and cellars of resort goods to a shine. Harvey saw none of this. He was moving between New York and Munich and Chicago, explaining something to new colleagues and partners. He gave seminars and hummed around the computer as usual, arguing with Kurt, who had recently presented him with a new idea and new drafts of a new program. He hardly even saw Tony. It seemed to him that a slight chill ran between them, and still his brother remained for him the second wing of the most native and favorite person, his heir, blood, life friend. Harvey was not a naive boy, and he was well aware that his brother was also in love with Lucy. But talk about her and never, as if a taboo imposed on both on this topic. Do not get involved, then nail the truth. Summer broke out. Resort village avalanches dumbfounded them from the enthusiasm of vacationers. Filled beaches became warm sea. Not yet Nanavia to the shores of the nasty lump of rotting algae. In the markets, bursting stalls from local ripe strawberries, scarlet hearts and berries beckoned. Try us the sweetest ones. Lucy ate, and ate the juicy fruits and could not get enough of them. Yesterday, Tony called her unexpectedly and told her that tomorrow night they would come to visit her with Harvey. A good excuse. She didn't know what to think anymore. Tony promised a tempting surprise, asked to prepare his wonderful borscht bread, pies, cutlets with fried potatoes are also welcome. The redhead himself snapped back at Lucy, but she smiled to herself. There was something so promising in Tony's voice that she was already burning with curiosity. At exactly 8:00 p.m. the doorbell rang and the brothers piled into the apartment at the same time. Sort out the groceries in the bags, Tony cheerfully commanded the girl. We have today a house party in honor of our common success. The table was set quickly. Lucy was not lazy. Huge pan with cutlets, ruddy potatoes, a dish of pies with meat, onions and eggs, cabbage, vegetable salad on the stove under steamy aromatic borscht. Tony quickly put on plates, brought with him delicacies. He stuck a cake in the freezer, put a small bucket of strawberries on the shelf, opened the champagne and made a speech. Guys, I've been thinking about it for a while and I've decided to give you a gift for two. Don't be so quick to object. I've got it all figured out. Lucy can use it too. She's been on her best behavior all these months. She's earned a great reputation with the management at the hotel. I've already gone there to get her references. Harvey and Lucy stared at him in total bewilderment until they didn't understand the thing. When did we meet, you dummies? Last October, they both answered at the same time. Well, my friends, since that day, we've each taken a different course in life. If you have noticed it, of course, all of us have achieved notable success in the business field, managed to increase our capitals, even if they are not the same size. Tony smiled. I've just bought you the island of Fukuoka in Vietnam. I picked out a fun hotel in the colonial French style. The grounds are all tropical flora, pools, beaches and villas. You'll fall right into the sea. Lucy and Harvey were quiet for a while, and then they started talking. What on earth have you got in your head? What's Tony's fantasy, if it's just the three of us? You see, my precious ones, I'm contractually obligated in October. And you, Harvey, you're taking a break. I've done my research. And Lucy has just finished her first season at the hotel. And you're on your way. Harvey, confused, was silent. He realized that just as he was in love with Lucy, his brother, knowing, or rather feeling Harvey's inner aspirations, was giving him a fabulous chance to deal with his love for Lucy. Lucy was half silent. She was scared. She really wanted to try to create a relationship with a decent man. Harvey was very handsome to her, but she thought he was out of place, out of her league. Ruffled Tony tried with his stories about paradisiacal Vietnamese bushes, stunning sun mysteries in those lands, divinely cooked seafood. To break the wall of their distrust to this adventure, he would give anything in the world to fly to Fukuoka together with Lucy. But his train had left. He knew it firmly, fired by the news Harvey and Lucy had finally agreed to try and make the journey. There was still plenty of time ahead of them before the trip, enough to settle all the business matters and prepare thoroughly. The cork from the champagne bottle flew out with a clinking rattle that condemned the passions at the table a bit. It brought everyone back to sinful ground. Lucy's cooking and the goodies brought by the guys were destroyed with rapture. Everyone was a little embarrassed, but tried to hide it from the others. When the men left Lucy late at night, both brothers kissed her goodbye on the cheek. She didn't pull away, didn't freak out, and even hugged them both lightly in return. One had to get rid of one's nightmares at some point, no matter how scary they were. In the backyard of the house by that bush, Tony and Harvey slowed their steps. You're the one who loves her. Tony, what are you doing? How are you gonna live with yourself? I don't want to live without you. You might not be able to forgive her if she chooses me. I tried to show her some affection, but I wasn't patient and she shut down for good. Don't make the same mistake I did, buddy. As for you and me being halves of the same whole, it can't last forever. If you are careful and wise, she will now become your second wing. The two brothers walked away from Lucy's house in different directions. Captivated by their love for the same woman, they managed to remain people who knew how to set the right accents in life. At the apartment window, Lucy froze. What does tomorrow hold for her? Will she be able to overcome her fears and love Harvey if fate in the person of Tony decided to give her such a chance? Only time will answer these questions. She sincerely hopes that ahead of her, after all the misadventures, are still very, very much different, but so magical and promising.